Two families, two duchies whose power could challenge the crown itself. The Duchy of Schutz ruled the battles. Their strength was undeniable, their influence boundless. The Second Duchy of Kleider was the center of business. Even the emperor bowed before the greatness of their names. But one fateful moment, everything changed. Two forces which, when united, acquired great power, which the imperial family could not cope with. Moreover, the two families were connected by strong ties of friendship. One ominous hour, when the moon was hidden behind the clouds, fate struck, and the ducal couple Kleider died after their carriage fell off a cliff. Duke Schutz, who heard the news of the death of his close friend, rushed to the scene, where he found the bodies of the couple and the child's clothes. No matter how thoroughly he searched the north, he could not find the missing ducal child. 10 years passed after that terrible tragedy, and the moment came when the Duke decided to adopt this child. As in the original story, Duke Schutz found a boy named Demian, the main male character. For a long time, the boy could not believe that his family had died, and now his fate lay in the hands of another person. The main character kept her promise to help him meet his family, so she definitely shouldn't have been kicked out of the orphanage. Now, as in the original, Damien will go to battle with the Duke 4 years later, and after meeting the main character named Annabelle, he will find long-awaited peace. The most unexpected thing is that the Duke came to the shelter one day and decided to take them together. His plans turned out to be too unpredictable, and would the girl really now have to live in a titled ducal family? She suggested that perhaps he wanted to make her his adopted daughter, but no way. The Duke confidently said that he was going to make this young lady the young master's daughter-in-law. For some reason, everything was not going according to plan. The situation was supposed to turn out differently, and the boy simply had to tie his fate to another girl. She was just trying to change the future to one in which she wouldn't be thrown out on the street. But was she really going to have to become his bride now? That didn't fit into any scenario or any logic. Life in the shelter allegedly changed dramatically, with influential aristocrats becoming frequent guests. All the children in the orphanage appeared to be in excellent condition, well-fed and clothed, but none of them had parents. The head teacher always said that the orphanage was doing its best to take care of the children, and noble people began to take the children from the orphanage. The Empire won victories time and again in large and small battles, and an era arrived when money flowed like a stream. Unable to spend their money, aristocrats, demonstrating their wealth and enormous generosity to the whole world, began to adopt other people's children. The director of the orphanage greeted and saw off influential people, barons and dukes, with great respect. But only the little girl Ellie knew the whole truth. The teachers washed and fed them so that they could show off as aristocrats, and they would look good in their eyes. The headmistress brought only attractive-looking orphans to the orphanage in order to receive more profit from sponsors. One day the headmistress found a beautiful little girl on the street, sitting and crying bitterly. Unfortunately, the girl became one of those children, but the headmistress ignored important facts, such as the fact that her mother was a famous thief whose deeds shook the empire. Even though she was later hanged after being caught stealing from a prominent county, it is unlikely that anyone would adopt the child of a thief. On the day when the girl was returned to the orphanage for the 3rd time, that same terrible tragedy with the carriage happened. An accident occurred, and at that moment the little girl realized that she was in the world of a book she knew. In the world Ellie lived in before, one touch was enough to create things and easily control people. In her past life, she worked on implementing this idea, and looking back through her vague memories, she was able to realize that she simply adored this work. Well, she managed to remember her past life, but can that terrible accident be called just luck? Still, one question remained among the many books. I clearly remembered the plot of one and only one, but at the same time I could not remember its name. In any case, she remembered the past, and she was incredibly lucky that it happened to her. She was here, in this new body, but her heart yearned for something that could never be returned. There were other children around her, just as lost and lonely, each with their own story, their own pain. Today, judging by the expression on the headmistress's face, she was unlucky again in her favorite game of chance. Little did she understand that she shouldn't play games where there wasn't even the slightest chance of success. Today a new child was brought to class. Surprisingly, he wasn't even nervous but was completely indifferent, and today he will live in the shelter. Ellie seemed to have given up hope for this meeting, but when she heard the boy's name, she understood everything he had finally come. After she found out what was inside the book, she never forgot about that child, the male protagonist who would overthrow the emperor in the future, Damien Kleider. Her role was the opposite. The girl bullied the boy. For this reason, she was kicked out of the orphanage. The first villain, Ellie. The life of the little sullen boy Damien in front of the orphanage was not easy at all. His father, Duke Kleider, was the owner of the most successful trading group in the empire, wielding enormous influence, and it was rumored that his family was the core of the empire, not the imperial family. As a result, the emperor was overcome with envy, so he decided to secretly get rid of Duke Kleider. After the tragedy, the gentleman's will was discovered, as if he had foreseen such an outcome. The Duke focused all his attention on the ruler of the barren, cold north, teeming with demonic creatures. The focus was on Duke Erhard Schutz, known as a brutal, cold-blooded killer on the battlefield. Rumors began to circulate that the Duke had inherited the trading group, and distant relatives arrived, insisting that it should belong to their family. Then the Duke realized that he needed to find the child as soon as possible, black-haired and blue-eyed, a copy of his father. Even though the forests were teeming with demonic creatures, the master was sure that this boy should remain alive. Damien lived in the family as a servant, whose life was more like the life of a small predatory animal. In that mysterious, dangerous forest, he did not die and survived, as befits a protagonist, and now he stood right in front of Ella. By the way, in the novel it was said that the boy had gone through a lot of hardships, but the girl did not expect that everything would be so bad. The headmistress instructed the children to tell the new resident of the shelter important rules and information that he needed to know. A boy with tousled dark hair and a look that seemed to have seen too much for his age stood in the doorway. Glances, like flocks of hungry birds, turned towards the newcomer. The silence was thick, oppressive, full of unspoken suspicion. The oldest boy in the orphanage, a boy named Carson, was unhappy there were more mouths to feed, and the amount of food available to them was decreasing. The boys surrounded the new guy, who looked too suspicious, but he didn't even bother to raise his head at them. Ellie knew these kids would regret what they did later, and in the past, in the original, she helped Carson's company bully him. In the end, she was kicked out of the shelter, of course. After that, a sad fate awaited her, but this time she decided to definitely save her life. The children, who had long since learned to survive in this place, were in no hurry to accept anyone else into their closed world. Carson called Ellie. She did everything else with them, but for some reason now she quit at a moment like this. The girl said, "The boy looks so weak, why bully him?" And the boys saw him as just a stupid, naive child. And no one wanted to share crumbs of attention, grains of food, or even worse, Hope was the most dangerous enemy here. Ellie was the daughter of a dirty thief, and outside the walls of the orphanage her life was happy. She was kicked out from everywhere. In the eyes of this boy she saw a reflection of her own pain. She understood how hard it could be for him. The teacher asked the children to gradually prepare for dinner and return to their seats. The worst thing is that from now on, Carson will be bullied, and if Ellie doesn't interfere, pretending that it doesn't concern her, she will at least be able to avoid a bad end. It wasn't even her life. Damien was the main character, so she was sure that he would be fine without her help. She decided to think better about what to do when she finally managed to leave the shelter. He would manage somehow anyway. His only weapon was his gaze, which never wavered. He was not like the others, he knew it. Ellie has seen countless people find trouble where they poked their noses without asking. Okay, she decided to help him once and not interfere with the main character's story anymore. But for now, in this new battle, he was alone against everyone, and the children's silence was more eloquent than any words. Ellie knocked on the door of the room. Carson was scared, thinking that the headmistress had come to check on them. A crowd of boys surrounded Damien, who was sitting on the floor, and the impudent boy insisted that they were simply training a newbie. They came up with the idea of a grand welcoming ceremony, but it looked like a stupid mockery. They laughed at his pretty face. She suddenly said, "It's better to look like that than to have an impudent face like Carson's." She laughed loudly, warning that it was just a funny joke. And by the way, the headmistress had been looking for the rude boy for a long time. She supposedly looked around and didn't find him. Everyone understood perfectly well that with her character she wouldn't wait long. And was it really the newcomer's lucky day today? Carson angrily threw the boy away, warning that he would come and deal with him anyway. Finally they left. Ellie was left alone with the new guy, and quietly asked if everything was okay with him. Damien looked at the bruises on his palm, and it wouldn't be surprising if he burst into tears right now. The boy began to rub his face. tears streaming from his eyes, but this could only make things worse. Ellie thoughtfully gave him some healing ointment to help ease the pain of the bruises, but Demian refused. He was sure he would be beaten before he felt better. No ointment will help him here, because he will have to endure beatings from stupid boys again. He knew what it was like to be new, to be a stranger in the shelter. Everyone here went through their own trials. Resistance breeds a new round of violence, the fact that the easiest way to reduce violence is inaction, and this little child has already realized a lot. Ellie insisted that it was better to treat bruises than not to treat them at all, and asked the boy to at least use her gift. She thought she already knew everything about Damian's pain through the book, but when she looked at this child's face, she saw a resemblance to herself, and for some reason she felt a heavy lump in her throat. It was time for dinner at the orphanage, and the teacher's voice was heard telling the children not to talk at the table. Looking around, Ellie noticed that the boy had skipped dinner and was nowhere to be seen. But if he didn't eat, he would be left without food until tomorrow, and every child in the orphanage was ready to eat the extra portion. Little Tommy asked if he could have the girl's bread, but this time she couldn't give it up. Most of the time, Ellie didn't eat the bread. She didn't even know if the new guy wanted to eat it, but she decided to give it a try. Usually at such a late hour one is supposed to clean the kitchen, but today the girl was very worried about Demian. It's strange, he wasn't in the bedroom. The other room was empty too, so where could he be hiding? As luck would have it, Carson and his gang of boys saw Ellie and asked what she was doing in the empty room and if she was looking for ghosts. It wasn't about ghosts at all. She had to lie that she was just checking if her friend was there. Carson had a new toy that was more fun than any ghosts, and now he was talking about the new thing. He listened as the headmistress told him that this worthless boy had been a miserable servant before coming here. He also killed a demonic beast in the pitch darkness, but no one was going to believe this nonsense. While Carson bullies almost all children, he is especially cruel to the boys Ellie shows interest in, the worst possible way for him to show his childish affection. Ellie said that the boy was walking towards the warehouse, and she definitely saw him there. No one was allowed to go there except nannies, and Carson wondered what he was supposed to do there. There was a lot of delicious food stored in the warehouse, she insisted. Damian was definitely there, and if he also defeated the monster, then he was very talented. Ellie happily admitted that now she understood why the boy wasn't forced to clean up. In fact, the newcomer did not work because he, as a servant, belonged to another person, but fortunately, Carson did not know anything about this. Usually they would have turned a blind eye to this, but now the guy was wondering if Ellie saw that he couldn't do anything with them. In order to distract his attention at least for a little while, the girl took some bread out of her briefcase and decided to give it to him. She is back. He feels childish sympathy for her and will definitely be happy with such a gesture of attention. Carson promised to happily eat the gift of bread, and a satisfied Ellie felt that everything was going according to plan. A dark winter night was falling over the orphanage, and the nanny was loudly asking the children to go to bed. The lantern, choked by the wind, was raging out of control. Ellie, barely reaching the windowsill, opened the heavy door of the shelter. Snow, fine and sharp, immediately began to settle on her disheveled blonde hair. Damian must be somewhere here. The full moon, hidden behind a veil of clouds, gave no light, only a lantern, like a small lighthouse, pierced the darkness. Behind the door, like an echo of a passing storm, the nanny's angry voice was heard, choice words pouring out like peas, pursuing the invisible thief. The stolen bread, a malicious smile touched Ellie's lips. Even if it was Carson now, she had no time for this. In reality, it was bread for Demian, but at least it was put to better use, and right now Carson should be punished. Somewhere here, in this snowy pool, Demian was hiding. His face, as lost as her own, flashed before her eyes. She remembered the words the boys had told her before coming here, and the new boy was a servant. Ellie clutched the lantern tighter, the weak light flickering as she walked forward into the thick of the snowstorm to where she hoped her little friend was hiding. She stopped in front of an ominous, dark tunnel, and it would have been better if Damian had hidden somewhere else. In the original, the Duke once asked the boy where he learned fencing, since he was an excellent swordsman. In order to survive in the darkness, he had to learn to fight with swords. And that was his response. Ellie used to think that this meant the development of the dark side of the main character, and she considered it just a trifle. But now she realized that the boy had to take up arms in order not to die in this harsh world. Near the tree, she saw a small figure of a man and asked if he didn't know how nasty a cold is. Demian sat without outerwear on a snowdrift and seemed not to feel the piercing northern cold at all. The girl told the nanny that Carson and his friends were caught, so he can sleep peacefully today and they better go back. The boy knew that this was only today. Tomorrow everything would return to normal, and he felt more comfortable sitting in a snowdrift. How wrong Ellie was. This boy's life is not far from tragedy. He humbly plunges into darkness, because pain brings peace. Perhaps for the same reason he took up the sword. She really wanted to help him. No one wants to be left in the dark all alone. She assured me that the boys were no longer there, and even if they returned, they would soon disappear. Ellie squatted down in front of him and said gently that he was no longer in any danger. She held out her dying lantern to him, then without a word extended her hand, and his winter sky-colored eyes widened in surprise. Something new flashed in them, bewilderment, and something else that he had not seen before, kindness. He did not know this word. No one ever tried to warm him. No one ever offered him their hand to lead him out of the cold. His heart, squeezed with fear and loneliness, responded weakly to this gesture. She was different. This little girl with a light in her hand wanted to help, not for the sake of something, just like that. This girl, she saw in him not an embittered, lost child, but someone who needed warmth and protection. Never before had he been treated with such care, tenderness. These words, eyes full of compassion, destroyed the walls that he had built around himself all these years. Her concern for his health touched him to the depths of his soul. Suddenly it was the beginning of something new, something exciting, something that could change everything. He felt forgotten feelings awakening within him, the vulnerability he had carefully hidden now coming to the surface, fueled by her kindness. Demian wanted to believe her, wanted to believe in this new reality. These moments were filled with a quiet struggle in his soul. He saw goodness, he saw compassion, and it was so unusual, so beautiful, that it seemed unreal. A sincere desire to help Damien was evident in every word as she begged him to return to the shelter. It was something new, unprecedented, something that his soul longed for, but did not dare to imagine. She didn't know if this child would understand her. Fortunately, the boy didn't resist, and that was enough to change her fate. Upon entering the shelter, she immediately warned that now it would be necessary to behave as quietly as possible. Even though the director and the teachers went out to play, it still wouldn't hurt to be careful in the orphanage. The children quietly walked into the principal's room. It was not without reason that Ellie brought the frozen boy here. His dark hair was covered with snow, and his small body trembled like a bird trapped in ice. Ellie suggested taking off her outerwear, since it would definitely not be possible to wash and warm up in it. Damien looked at his new friend with fear. But was she really going to send him to the bath? Only the director's bath had hot water, but now the boy looked like an icicle. If he gets frostbite, he'll have to cut off an arm or a leg, or maybe even several limbs at once. She realized that maybe he was embarrassed by her presence and promised that she was not going to spy on him. That wasn't the point at all. It turns out the boy considered his body simply disgusting. Before coming to the orphanage, Demian was someone's servant, and he probably has a lot of scars from his past life. He was very afraid that the girl would be scared when she saw his body, but she took him by the hands and warned him that she wouldn't be disgusted. She didn't want him to feel scared and asked him not to be upset under any circumstances. A person's body cannot be ugly, and one should never feel guilty about it. Ellie's kindness had an immediate effect. It was necessary to wash up quickly. No one knew when the director would return. There was no time to waste here, and she was sure the boy could wash himself without her help. Ellie went off to look for clothes and suggested that he sit in the warm water for now and just warm up. Ellie, whose care was like the gentle touch of spring, had already prepared a bath with pleasantly hot water for him. A frozen cold penetrated to the bones, but not just the cold of the outside world, but an icy numbness that gripped his soul. The steam rising from the surface enveloped the space like a gentle cloud, promising comfort. Demian, timidly, as if experiencing such a gift for the first time, plunged into the fragrant depths. He was caught up in a wave of unknown bliss, carried away from the raging storms of his inner experiences. Ellie approached cautiously, trying not to scare him with her appearance, to find out if the warm bath had helped him. The warmth penetrating through the skin began to melt the frozen sorrows, spreading through the veins, reviving every cell. The clothes she managed to find were a little big, although she brought him the smallest ones. But no matter, even in it he looked incredibly cute, as if he had just stepped off the cover of a fashion magazine. Besides the hot bath, Ellie also prepared something else. She took food from the pantry while the boy was washing himself. It seems that Demian has never seen such food before, and has he really never eaten anything like this before? It was terrible. The cruel people did not feed him any food at all. Ellie became furious. It was impossible to imagine what he had to go through, the conditions in which this boy lived. She brought him a delicious vegetable sandwich and even had to show him how to eat it properly. For him, accustomed to the meager scraps of existence, this was something unprecedented, a real miracle. The boy, with trepidation, as if touching a sacred artifact, took the offered piece. His small fingers, still hesitant but full of anticipation, brought it to his lips. The first bite, and the world around him seemed to freeze. It was divine, not just food, but an explosion of taste, a symphony of sensations that awakened long-forgotten feelings in him. Damien's eyes, which usually concealed bottomless sadness, now shone with amazement and pure, unclouded joy. Luckily, the boy ate with appetite, even though he was the main character, but he was still a small child and didn't even know how to dry his hair. Ellie thoughtfully wiped his hair with a fluffy towel so that he would not catch a cold under any circumstances. The boy looked like a small puppy, but the good thing was that he was no longer so scared and wary. And if he had a tail, he would wag it in all directions with joy, just like a little dog. While she was drying his hair, she noticed in horror the strange marks on his childish neck. These were terrible wounds from animal bites, huge scars that clearly still hurt. The boy said that these marks were already there when he was picked up, so his owner told him to grow his hair. The book, of course, described Damien as having shoulder-length hair, but that meant that was the real reason. It was hard to even imagine how cruel the previous world of this novel was for him. The girl asked with interest whether it was comfortable for him to wear such long bangs, from which almost nothing was visible. What's interesting is that in this world, it wasn't just him who felt bad. Ellie herself also had a hard time going through all the difficulties. The cutest thing was that this boy's appearance seemed to have a bad effect on her childish heart. When she brushed his bangs out of his eyes, he turned out to be even more handsome than she thought. But it was the eyes, two bottomless lakes in which the soft blue sky splashed, that captured the gaze, making the heart clench with tenderness. They reflected, as if in a mirror, dreams, hopes, and the unspoken pain that young souls so often carry within themselves. Touching his forehead, Ellie felt heat. It seemed like he had a temperature, but did the boy really not feel anything? Damien replied in fear that he didn't have any fever, he was just hot. Ellie certainly didn't want him to come down with a bad cold during his first days at the shelter. Walking slowly along the dark corridor, the children tried to be as quiet as possible so as not to wake any of the other children. Ellie led him into a room where there were no rowdy boys who hated the new boy, and invited him to sleep there. Little Tommy heard someone come into the room and immediately woke up, asking who his friend had brought with her. On Damien's first night at the orphanage, she led him to the nursery, where warm darkness enveloped the sleeping children. Luckily, Carson wasn't there. His violence could have frightened the newcomer. Ellie carefully pointed to a free bed. She saw how fear trembled faintly in his eyes, how he looked around timidly, trying to get his bearings in this new, unknown world. Her soul was squeezed with sympathy. She so wanted to dispel his anxiety, protect him from all adversity, give him a feeling of security that he perhaps never knew. She wanted this first sleep within the walls of the shelter to become an island of peace for him, where nightmares would retreat and be replaced by quiet, lulling dreams. She wanted to whisper many words of support to him, but she knew that sometimes silence, filled with a sincere desire for good, speaks louder than words. Damien carefully lay down next to her on the bed, and it looked like he was seeing a bed for the first time, like he was not used to it. Her presence, her quiet plea for his peaceful sleep, that was all she could give him now, and that was enough. The boy had a pleasant floral scent, but when Ellie had secretly washed herself at the headmistress's, there was nothing there that could smell like that. Having carefully covered him with a blanket, Ellie wished the boy good night, and was sure that he would soon be able to fall into a sound sleep. For some reason, he didn't say anything in response, and didn't he even know that the other person also needed to be wished good night? His eyes, reflecting the dim light of the nightlight, showed fatigue and some kind of childish anxiety. She sighed quietly, wishing only one thing for sleep to find him, dispel all his fears and give him peace for the night. The boy, curled up in a ball, seemed even smaller and more defenseless than usual. His thin shoulders trembled. Now all he needed was privacy. Let Damien get some sleep. Let this night be an island of peace for him, and let the morning bring hope. Damien looked at Ellie, and a strange, timid feeling was born inside him, a mixture of surprise and timid gratitude. He saw her not just as a girl, but as a guardian angel who had descended from heaven into this gloomy shelter. In his past life, Care was a rare guest, but here, in this new, still so alien world, Ellie was his first ray of hope, his shield from all future troubles. He couldn't understand. Maybe she was kind to him because of guilt, but still, he was a servant, so it would be normal to avoid him. But she didn't mind. She was especially caring when she was around him today. Why was it he, so lost and uncertain, who deserved her attention? In her eyes he saw a reflection of something pure and bright, which he considered lost forever. The reality embodied in Ellie filled his heart with a sinking happiness and a silent question about what he had done to deserve it. Ellie had clear and beautiful eyes. Demian closed his eyes and became scared. He should not hope under any circumstances, and this could not happen. Demian's life was woven from pain and fear, like a thin thread woven into the rough canvas of existence. He was a thing, a toy in the hands of a cruel aristocrat, whose whim determined his fate. Every day became a new test, a new scene in a bloody theater where he was the main actor, doomed to suffering. When guests arrived, filling the throne room with ringing laughter and the clink of glasses, the hour of testing came for Demian. He was brought out to the amusement of the crowd. Ahead were monsters, creatures of darkness, whose fangs gleamed in the torchlight. Behind them were dozens of eyes thirsting for a spectacle, eyes that did not care whose blood would spill before their eyes. He fought not for victory but for survival. Every blow of the sword, every dodge was a prayer, a plea for this horror to end soon. He was a servant whose only purpose was to entertain cruel hearts. Demian felt his strength draining away, pain burning through his body, but the deepest wound was the despair that had eaten into the very core of his being. If he doesn't kill, they will kill him. Every time he desperately tried to gather his strength, fighting dangerous, bloodthirsty monsters for the amusement of the aristocrats. A familiar, sweet voice rang out through his consciousness, a girl affectionately calling him by name. Demian opened his eyes in fear. The boy's face was covered in cold sweat, and was he really having another terrible nightmare? Surprisingly, Ellie was nearby. She heard his screams, but she was afraid that yesterday he had caught a cold. She carefully placed her palm on his head. There seemed to be no fever, but the boy was sweating profusely. A sharp breath tore him from the grip of the nightmare. Demian opened his eyes, but the world around him seemed just as frightening as the one he had just left. His hands were shaking and his breathing was interrupted by convulsive sighs, but through the veil of fear he saw her, Ellie, standing next to him, her silhouette softly outlined in the light of the room. Demian was calculating a strange feeling. No one had ever worried about him before, not even himself. But this fragile girl was always there. She was worried, seeing him so trembling, pale, with eyes full of unspoken pain. Was he really that scared? She wanted to hug him, to comfort him, to tell him that he was safe now, that the nightmares were behind him. Ellie was about to go get a cold towel, but suddenly the boy grabbed her by the dress and whispered that nothing hurt. But there was definitely something wrong with him, the girl warned him. He still didn't need to strain himself yet. It was only the first day at the shelter, so it was no wonder the boy was still plagued by nightmares from his past life. It was strange. When he was next to Ellie, he felt so warm and ticklish, as if he had swallowed a huge, warm sun, warming him from the inside. Maybe he should have told her that he was actually sick, but then Ellie would have started to worry about him even more. There was a sharp, thunderous knock on the door, and the room fell into a sharp, frightening silence, broken only by their rapid breathing. A furious, heart-rending scream was heard from behind the door. Carson's voice, distorted with anger, banged against the walls like a cornered animal. He accused, shouted that he had been deceived, that it was all a rigged game, evil intent. Every word was like a blow, filled with burning resentment and blind rage. Carson screamed, "Ellie did it on purpose. The boy wasn't in the pantry. It was because of her that they got caught by the teachers, and she should understand how ridiculous it looked." Ellie looked at Carson, whose eyes were wide with anger, and knew there was nowhere to retreat. She didn't hear Carson's whisper of hatred, didn't see a spark of malice in his eyes. Her world narrowed to a small, lonely boy who was just beginning his journey in this harsh world. He desperately blamed Demian, but in fact there was a Glock only here who was deceived. Ellie saw him not as a victim, but as a future hero whose power had yet to be awakened. Carson saw Ellie spread her wings, covering something fragile and vulnerable, and he, Carson, felt rejected, forgotten, his rage only growing from the injustice. The clock chimed, meaning the teacher would soon be making his rounds, and right at that moment she walked into the room and started scolding the boy. She saw that he was being rude to the girls again, but Carson again began to justify herself, as if she had started it first, and called him stupid. The boy screamed that Ellie was to blame for everything, and she even asked the children present to confirm his words. It was terrible. The boy was constantly beating people, so the teacher scolded him. The aristocrats don't want to pay attention to him. His behavior was inappropriate, the girl said. Yesterday the new guy had a fever and he felt very bad. She was going to go to the teacher for medicine, but Carson kept repeating that all the teachers had left. Carson, his rage seething like a volcano, watched the scene, his lips twisted into a wicked grin. Ellie started crying, insisting that this simply couldn't be happening and that the teachers would never leave the children alone, especially at such a late hour. Her words to the teacher were directed at those who sought to cause pain, at those who built their games on the misfortune of others. The final nail in her brilliant plan was the fact that the pantry had been opened the previous evening, and after that no one would question her for sure. On the director's orders, she was there during the day and was sure that she was the last one to close that door. One of the teachers decided to arrange a secret meeting in the storage room and was glad that they would not find a better place. It was her huge mistake, and the girl cried. Allegedly, she left the keys in the director's office and the pantry could not be opened. Ellie put on a real show that she had lost her keys somewhere, but seeing the girl's tears, the teacher asked her not to blame herself. She was even ready to go to the principal with the boy and insisted that all this happened because of her carelessness. The teacher knew perfectly well that it was she who left the pantry open, and in order not to be caught by the principal with her secret meeting, she sternly refused. Ellie said the boy had been telling everyone how the teachers had gone to the casino that night, but that definitely couldn't have happened. All the blame fell on him. He lied about the casino, because of this, a terrible disaster almost happened to the new guy. Carson certainly won't escape punishment this time, even though he never actually said anything like that. He continued to shout that the girl was blatantly lying, but no one was going to listen to his excuses anymore. Ellie had once again managed to achieve a great victory over Carson, and the room finally became quiet. At least for a while he won't bother Demian, and at least for a few days the boy will be able to live in peace. She felt her heart fill with determination, how it became a wall protecting Damien from all the shadows of the past, from all the threats of the present. The girl happily warned Betty and Tommy to come down quickly so that they wouldn't get into trouble with the principal. Little Betty rushed to hug her beloved friend and asked how she was. Ellie gently stroked the girl's head and promised to come down to them as soon as possible. There were only the two of them left in the room, and it turned out that Demian gradually began to understand what was really going on here. The boy asked, because yesterday none of the teachers were in the orphanage, and she herself said so. Ellie promised him on the first day that she would protect him from these children, and this is how she decided to repay them. The new guy looked at his new friend in surprise and still couldn't understand why she decided to stand up for him. He was sure that adults should help children, although he had never even met adults like her. Ellie sat down in front of him on the bed and warned him that there would definitely be someone in this world who would help him in the future. The most important thing is that the boy will finally be able to trust such a person and feel calm. Trust, how many times had this word been spoken out loud, only to later turn into a bitter deception, was alien to Demian, like a foreign language that he would never be able to learn. He learned not to believe, not to hope, not to wait. The world seemed to him a cruel game, where he was just a pawn, constantly moved, deceived, used. When there are people nearby whom he can trust, then he will finally find true happiness. There was no cunning in her eyes, no ambiguity in her movements. He watched her, trying to catch even a shadow of a lie, even a hint of deception, but he found only purity and care. Her presence nearby was like a breath of fresh air after long years in a stuffy room. The heart, accustomed to pain, began to thaw timidly. Could she really be the one you could trust, the one whose word was law, whose promise was not an empty sound? The thought seemed both desirable and frightening. If he believed her and was deceived again, the pain would be even greater. But looking into her eyes, full of sympathy and understanding, he felt something new being born inside him. Carson hated the boy even more. It was because of him that he was now locked in this dirty room. He couldn't understand why Ellie took his side. She was seeing him for the first time and was already running around like she was his little brother. He was making a cunning plan in his head to get Ellie to pay attention to him again, because her friendliness would be short-lived. Carson desperately wanted her care to be his alone, and for her to forget about this new guy forever. At the shelter, Ellie often helped in the kitchen, and today the hot soup was simply wonderful. She asked Damien to help her too. The boy stood nearby and diligently stirred with a ladle. It's strange, but he was still silent. Was he really worried about the girl lying to the teacher? Of course, he was used to constantly enduring violence, didn't know what a lie was, and was obviously just confused. Ellie saw his anxiety and decided to ask him directly why he felt this way, and she suggested he might still be confused about what happened this morning, referring to his deception. She didn't want the boy to take everything so seriously, and the offenders needed to be properly avenged so that they would learn from their mistake. Even if she lied, it was better to do so than to continue to helplessly endure the bullying. Therefore, no matter how the boy lived before he ended up in the orphanage, she wanted him to never allow anyone to bully him again. They came to an agreement easily, but the boy heard such strange words for the first time in his life. He always had to do only what his master told him to do. That was the only way he could save his life. Ellie saw in him that childish vulnerability that so often becomes a target for cruelty. In his world, where bullying was commonplace and pain a familiar companion, patience was considered a virtue. After listening to her words, Damien decided that he would not lose to anyone again, and would also definitely protect this girl, just as she had protected him. By any means necessary, even if it cost her own life, Ellie said otherwise, that resentment is a poison that poisons the soul, that bullying is a wound that never heals unless it is healed. The director of the orphanage had a splitting headache today. She shouldn't have drunk so much at the casino yesterday. She was sure that none of the children would suspect that the teachers had actually left the orphanage at night, leaving them unattended. The director considered children to be small, stupid creatures who were definitely incapable of making logical conclusions. Entering the kitchen, she was very surprised when she saw the newcomer and why this slave was working here. If only she hadn't lost that game, or rather, if she hadn't gotten drunk, he wouldn't have had to be taken to an orphanage, because someone asked to keep the boy and forgive the debt. Although she told the children that the new boy would now live with them, she actually saw this boy as a servant who would soon be taken away by his mistress. If word reaches her ears that he works here, there will definitely be a terrible scandal. Carson somehow managed to escape from the room he was locked in, and one of the teachers was trying to scold him right now. He did not consider himself guilty. He asked to be released in order to prove his truth, how the little girl had deceived him. The director heard loud screams and hurried to figure out what had happened and why they were screaming throughout the entire orphanage. The teachers say that this child has been causing more and more trouble lately. He even stole bread from the pantry recently. The boy was scolded in front of all the children, and the teachers were sure that this was not the first time he had tried to steal something. The director, who had a headache, could not stand such noise and decided that, one way or another, she had to teach him a proper lesson. When the teacher took him by the hand, Carson realized that now he could be punished for a long time and locked in the room again. He was so angry that he decided not only not to tolerate this loner, but pointed his finger at one of the children. The boy said that one of the children was also there, but he alone managed to escape from the pantry and remain unpunished. It's no wonder he pointed the finger at the new guy, Damien, because if it weren't for him, he wouldn't have been punished. Reacting quickly, Ellie stood up for him and stated that the boy had not gone into the pantry that day. He was feeling unwell that day and was in the same room with her the whole time, so he definitely couldn't have been in such a place. Turning to the principal, the girl insisted that she herself knew how Carson constantly bullied other children. The director began to suspect something was wrong. This little girl always found herself at the center of events, and this was definitely not without reason. One day, when Ellie already believed in a new happy life, she was returned to the shelter again. Then she asked why she was here again, but the director decided not to explain anything to her, as if she should figure it out herself. The lady assured that it was not her grateful mother's fault, and if she had thought for herself, the girl would not have ended up in the orphanage. This wasn't the first time Ellie had been abandoned. She had been taken into families many times, but then returned back, begging them to come and take her in. Even then, the director realized that this girl, who had always been such a quiet person, had suddenly decided to stand up for someone, and that something was definitely wrong. In fact, the director had no time for this at all. The boy begged the lady to believe his words. Ellie was lying, and he did not steal that bread. Clutching her aching head, the lady shouted loudly for everyone to immediately shut up and stop and accept each other. She asked the teacher to sort things out with the children and ordered the new boy to be removed from work so that he would never show up in the kitchen again. Ellie asked the boy to go back to the dining room. She still had something to do in the kitchen. For the first time in his life, someone told him about his own value, about his right to dignity. For the first time, someone made him understand that he was not just a victim, but an individual entitled to respect. He didn't want to part with her for a minute. It was good that she would come as soon as dinner was prepared. The director didn't let the new kid off work out of any kindness. The reason was simple: he had a mistress, but in the eyes of the other children, it looked different. A heavy silence hung in the air, saturated with fear and despair. Ellie reached out and touched his shoulder, silently conveying all her tenderness, all her faith in his innocence. Her steps echoed in the children's hearts, causing a wave of horror. She took the boys by the hands, including Damien. Tommy asked in fear if the teacher had gone to punish them, but it was her blows that were very strong. The last time he got into detention, Tommy never forgot it, and it was a good thing the other kids didn't get it that way. In fact, the new guy was simply removed from minor work, but now he needed to quickly finish his business and go to him. Damien's heart sank in fear. Was the same thing awaiting him? Was he, a newcomer whose soul had not yet had time to get used to these walls, going to be punished for the sins of others? He is not guilty of anything. His hands are clean. His heart knows no guilt. But the shadows of the past whispered to him that justice is a luxury inaccessible to the weak. The boy didn't want to be alone, but he didn't want to bother Ellie even more. And when he was almost upset, he heard the girl's gentle voice. It was her again, her sweet, radiant smile that warmed even the most terrible moments. Seeing her, Damien immediately cheered up. His happiness knew no bounds, especially since a hot, fragrant lunch awaited them. The menu featured incredibly delicious dishes, and a joyful Tommy held a fork and knife in his hands, anticipating the delicious meal he was about to eat. Today he was very lively because Carson was not around again. The girl asked to give up her seat at least once to the new guy. Tommy refused, but Ella managed to persuade him, because tough guys have to give up their seats. Tommy was always easy to persuade, but he warned that he was only giving up his place for today because he was a tough guy now. It's no surprise he was still a small child, and today the place of honor next to Ellie was taken by a newcomer. Tommy wanted to believe that Damien was like a kind and innocent child, and just as they were about to start eating, a loud scream was heard in the dining room. Little Betty cried loudly throughout the dining room. Her favorite doll fell right into the soup and stained her snow-white paw. Ellie asked the boys to start eating the hot soup before it got cold, and she went to sort things out and calm the girl down. She hugged the little girl tightly and said the main words so that she wouldn't worry, because her favorite toy wasn't completely ruined. You just need to wash the wet part. His paw will be snow white again, and everything will be fine. Ellie went with Betty to wash the toy to get it in order as quickly as possible, and the girl no longer cried. For the first time, Damien was left alone among all the children in the orphanage. Ellie left, promising to return soon, but time dragged on endlessly. Tommy came closer. The boy extended his hand, open, friendly, with a smile full of curiosity. Tommy waited, hoping that this new, mysterious Damien would accept the invitation to become his real friend, just like Ellie. He just offered to be friends, but the new guy didn't even look at his side. Maybe he was very shy. Tommy was just a good friend of the girl, and asked why they couldn't be best friends, like he and Ellie. But Damien didn't even move. He didn't want friends. He didn't want hands extended out of nowhere. A storm of loneliness raged in his soul, like that of a wounded wolf cub who hisses at everyone who comes near. The boy's unfriendly gaze immediately made Tommy feel uneasy, and he quickly removed his hand. Ellie quickly calmed Betty down and, looking into the dining room, asked the new guy if he had had time to try the delicious mushroom soup. Damien grabbed a spoon and began to quickly eat the soup, as if he wanted to look the best in the eyes of this girl. Tommy looks at the new guy on the scene with skill, but decides not to ask him to be his friend anytime soon. Ellie noticed that Tommy was standing rooted to the spot and hadn't even touched his food yet. Tommy was almost speechless at the newcomer's disdainful gaze, laughed uncertainly, and decided to sit down at the table. At first he thought that this boy was just small and naive, but now in his gaze he did not see childish innocence. He looked more like a huge predator, a black panther with blue eyes, and Tommy was sure the guy was cheating on her. Today the new guy got to take a hot bath again, and his chubby cheeks looked like rice cakes, which she just wanted to squeeze, soft and fluffy. But Ellie kept herself in check because the boy was just starting to get used to her. Damien enjoyed taking a warm bath, and as soon as he washed his face, he immediately felt better. Each time, Ellie carefully dried his hair with a terry towel, and with each day the boy became more and more beautiful. He probably feels uncomfortable with such long hair. She would like to cut it, but if such a face sees the light of day, all the aristocrats will want to have it. According to the script, only the Duke was supposed to adopt him, but until then the girl desperately decided to hide such beauty. This evening she invited the new boy to sleep alone on the bed next to hers. At first he was scared when he heard that he would have to sleep alone, as if he was afraid of something. Damien's face instantly became sad and sorrowful. Was he really upset because she asked him to sleep alone? Ellie looked at the boy with interest. Maybe he wanted to tell her something or confess something. After her words, he silently climbed onto the bed, covered himself with a blanket, and without saying a good night, he abruptly turned away. Ellie didn't worry about it. He was probably just tired. Too many unexpected events had happened today. She leaned over to Damien, who had already wrapped himself in a blanket, and quietly wished him good night. Ellie rose from the bed, her voice soft and warm, hanging in the air, full of care and tenderness. Oh, miracle, the boy, usually silent and withdrawn. His lips trembled. He answered her in kind, with simple words, full of unexpected sincerity. She hadn't even hoped for this. It was so sweet, so touching, that her heart sank with sudden joy. Ellie smiled, feeling the ice melt in his soul. For the first time he opened the door to his world, even if only for a tiny moment. But not only was the sweet wish for sweet dreams sweet, today he called the girl by name for the first time. For some reason, just one little word from this child already made her incredibly happy, and a pleasant warmth spread throughout her body. The silence of the night weighed on Ellie today, and today it seemed especially ominous. A bright flash pierced her consciousness. Ellie felt the familiar urge to visit the restroom, but her body was suddenly gripped by incomprehension. Ellie stood up slowly, trying not to make any noise, and looked around. The window was slightly open, the thin curtain fluttering in the draft. Where Damien had just been sleeping soundly, there was now a gaping emptiness, and my heart sank, wondering where the boy could have been that night. His bed was empty, and the girl asked Betty, who had woken up, where Damien had gone in the middle of the night. Clutching her favorite toy tightly in her hands, the little girl looked fearfully at the empty bed and said that he had returned. It was about Carson. As soon as his punishment was over, he gathered his whole crowd and visited the room. Every drop of blood that trickled down his lower lip was a drop of pain frozen in the winter air. Carson's voice, sharp and commanding as a whiplash, pierced the silence, sounding not just like malice but like a reflection of the deep, twisted pain he was feeling. From the first minutes he hated the new guy, and he was sure that he was definitely happy because Ellie was constantly keeping an eye on him. Damien's heart beat faster, drowning out the sound of his own broken soul. The hatred that had seemed alien to him just yesterday now pulsed inside, mixing with despair. He saw in the eyes of those standing around him not anger, but emptiness, a gaping emptiness that they themselves did not understand. At that moment, he remembered the words of Ellie, who had long since sincerely asked the boy to never allow himself to be bullied like that again. He began to feel something changing inside him, the feeling of vulnerability that had once been familiar now giving way to something new, more acute. Carson shouted, "The girl just has a weakness for pathetic nobodies like the new guy." Thoughts, like voices, called him to action. He had to become strong, like that beast that is not afraid of the dark. He had to learn to protect himself and others. Carson tried to hurt the boy, as if he was just one of the pathetic children in the orphanage, and that was the only reason Ellie was looking after him, and he was not something special. Useless, stupid, these were the usual insults, of which there had already been so many, as well as physical violence. But for some reason only after these words his heart seemed to turn to ashes, and then slowly sank to the bottom. And Damien, sitting in the midst of this chaos, felt not only physical pain, but also the pain that was tearing him apart from the inside. Carson wanted the newcomer to understand correctly his presence in the same shelter with them, the impudent slave. It was the pain of misunderstanding, the pain of realizing how easy it is to break a fragile child's soul. In this emptiness, hope was drowning, timid and fragile, like a single snowdrop breaking through the ice. Damien, frozen on the edge of the raging river, felt the icy breath of fear burning his soul. His heart, ready to jump out of his chest, was pounding wildly, echoing the roar of the whirlpool under his feet. He saw only an abyss, dark and alluring, ready to swallow him whole. When the world narrowed to despair, she appeared, Ellie. Her name sounded in his mind like an echo of hope, a saving thread stretched out from the abyss. Her small but strong hand gripped his wrist so tightly that he felt his body being lifted off the slippery stone. Damien certainly never left the bed without her knowledge, and a strong panic began to rise in her chest. Ellie knew Carson occasionally pushed children he didn't like into the lake, but it was winter now, and the boy was clearly in danger. She knew, of course, that Carson had always done crazy things, but she couldn't believe that he was really going to do something so nasty. The girl's caustic words pierced the boy's heart. He didn't expect her to say such a thing to his face. When the new guy showed up, he immediately noticed that the girl not only stopped participating in the bullying at some point, but also took a step back. For some reason, she began to take care of Damien, worried when he was sick, and even defended him in front of the teacher. Carson couldn't understand what she saw in this boy, and even now she stands and hugs him carefully. No wonder he didn't like it from the very beginning, and for this reason alone, he felt incredible hatred towards him. Seeing that Ellie had come to save him, he became even more angry and swung his fist to hit the newcomer with all his might. Because of this, all his plans went awry. They stopped communicating with Ellie, and who does this new guy think he is? As he swung to strike Damien, he didn't expect anything or anyone to stop him. But Ellie pushed him away with unexpected force, a sudden movement, a loss of balance, and now Carson was flying forward, inexorably heading towards the darkening surface of the cold lake. The water embraced him with an icy embrace, making him gasp from surprise and piercing cold. He just needed to stop in time. Ellie called him a nasty boy who finally got what he deserved. While the friends were trying to pull the boy out of the cold lake, the girl sternly declared that he wasn't even worth talking to anymore. She grabbed the newcomer's hand and hurried back to the shelter, the cold wind cutting through her to the bone. This was the first time Damien had seen sweet and caring Ellie so angry. But why was she so angry? He started to worry about nutrition, whether he was already too weak. She was angry because he caused her trouble, or maybe this was all just a bad dream. Damien let go of her hand, and at that moment he was pierced by a sharp, painful misunderstanding of what was happening. They stopped for a moment. Ellie decided to ask the most important question that was troubling her soul. Why, when the boys bullied him, beat him, and tried to push him into the lake, he just stood there and remained silent. Why didn't he resist, but allowed his offenders to do all the horrors they wanted? Looking into the eyes of this kind girl, he felt that she was really angry with him. He looked into her eyes, which reflected the same fear that he himself had just experienced. Damien lowered his head and asked if it really felt some vile pity for him and was looking at them only for that reason. Ellie didn't expect to hear unpleasant words, but the boy insisted that if that was all it was, then it would be better to stop. He had long been accustomed to such things. She was desperately trying to help him. His words were painful. Did he really think all this time that she was communicating with him only out of pity? Ellie sincerely apologized. Maybe it was her fault that she made him think that way. She had also said earlier that the boy looked weak. These were rash words, and perhaps she should have apologized back then. On the contrary, she did not consider him weak. He was stronger than anyone, and this was absolutely true. The incredible power emanating from this fragile creature turned the course of his destiny. Damien thought she would say that she just felt sorry for him, but she said different words about how he was very brave and strong. Tears mixed with icy splashes flowed down his cheeks, but now they were tears of relief, gratitude so all-consuming that words lost all meaning. The boy said sadly until that moment he had thought that his naivety was simply annoying her. Ellie was very surprised how he could think all this time that he could bore her or be disgusting. The boy cried bitterly. The girl carefully asked him not to rub the tears from his eyes and just look at her. It turns out she didn't hate him, but how could one hate a skilled child with such a beautiful face? She couldn't even imagine why anyone could dislike him, but the boy said that at that time she looked away from him. When it happened, Ellie didn't even understand what was being discussed, but there was one occasion when she timidly said it was harmful to her fragile heart. In fact, she hadn't looked for another reason, one she was too embarrassed to admit now. It was a stupid reason. She just looked away to avoid embarrassment, but he had already managed to come up with something. Ellie decided to show the boy her linked little fingers. They mean promises, and now he should definitely believe her. Now he wanted to always hold her hand, and when they ate together, sit only next to her. Finally, he managed to talk to each other. Demian never wanted to be offended by her again. Holding his hand tightly, the girl looked into his eyes and asked that the next time he was bullied, he should definitely defend himself. Don't let anyone treat you like that. Ask them right away about what's bothering them, and never hold a grudge. It was time to return to the shelter to treat the wounds, and the words of this little fragile girl turned out to be absolutely true. Walking through the cold, fluffy snowdrifts, it was thanks to her that he learned what true happiness was. There will definitely be someone in this world who will help him, so he will be able to trust this person, or else he will find true happiness. It seems that the boy has already found it. Otherwise, why does he feel so good now, even despite the tears sticking to his eyes? And so now he decided to allow himself to be a little more greedy towards this sweet girl. In the cold, gloomy northern dungeon, loud screams of people were heard. Herzog did not want to listen to such lies anymore. Because of the false information, he wasted a lot of time here today, but he still didn't manage to find out anything. He warned his assistant that they urgently needed to move to the next location where he would be able to find answers to his questions. Ellie examined the boy's bruises, treated his wounds, and now she could finally go to bed peacefully. Demian asked if he could lie down next to her today because he was still having terrible nightmares. He was afraid to fall asleep, but Ellie was worried the bed was so narrow that it would hardly be comfortable for them to sleep together. Although there was nothing to be done, it was not difficult for her to fulfill his request, and the satisfied boy lay down next to his friend. It seemed like his mood quickly lifted. Even though she was just a minor character, she was glad that she could help him. She felt like an older sister and a younger brother now, carefully covering him with a blanket. The boy was indignant he didn't want to be her younger brother, despite the age difference. Demian was only 11 years old. The girl was already 13, and she laughed. They looked exactly like brother and sister. For some reason, he got angry again. Even though he was still small, he was still an impressive protagonist, but she treated him like a child. She was just trying to say that she felt very warm sleeping next to him, and to be honest, he felt very warm being next to her too. This little boy was incredibly sweet, even when he was in a bad mood, and it was impossible to be upset with him. Finally, he warmed up in a warm bed. Ellie warned him that it was too late and it was time to go to bed. In a lonely, cold shelter, where children hoped that one day their lives would change, the fate of the main characters unfolded. Surprisingly, today, Ellie had wonderful dreams. A warm summer day, she and Demian were picking flowers in the forest, and she felt happy. Ellie, with her radiant smile, placed the flower crown on her head, and it was an incredibly sweet moment. She finally had a good dream, but as soon as she opened her eyes, she immediately felt that the boy was all on fire. He was coughing a lot. She said he was fine, but it was obvious he had a high fever. His voice was hoarse, but he still wouldn't admit honestly when he felt ill, which happened last night. Demian deliberately didn't tell Ellie anything, and she blamed herself for sleeping peacefully and not paying attention to his health. The temperature was very high, the children were worried, but now the new baby will have to lie down for a few days. It was strange how he could even talk in such intense heat at times like these. Children usually cry loudly. But for some reason now, the boy was worried about where he would be. She needed to work, otherwise the director might scold her. Ellie quickly completed her duties, so she promised to return soon, bring hot soup, and asked the boy to close his eyes and count to 100. He just wanted her to come back as soon as possible. Good obedient boy. Ellie learned that she could only get the medicine when the director was gone, but it turned out she had no plans to leave her office. And it seemed like she wasn't in the mood at all today. The slightest mistake and sparks would definitely fly. The director asked the girl to clean up even faster. She was angry. There were so many children in the orphanage and the finances were real. The shelter has recently accumulated too much debt, but it's not surprising, since the director was losing all her money at the casino. Will she now have to sell sacred mana stones to pay off her debts? A mana stone is a mineral with a high concentration of mana, allowing people without the ability to use magic to freely use it. It is an expensive item, and such stones are sold for huge amounts of money. A real magician must be involved in its production. It is not surprising why they are so expensive. The director did not want to sell the stones. She had collected them with such difficulty for a long time, and was not ready to part with them. She had been planning this for a long time. If only this girl had not been the daughter of a thief, everything would have worked out well. The director would have simply sold it to the aristocrat long ago for a tidy sum, and would have been able to quickly pay off all the accumulated debts. The orphanage's teacher warned the director that the number of aristocrats willing to take a child from the orphanage was decreasing because of Duke Schutz. The director understood that the Duke might visit the orphanage, but she certainly did not want to sell her treasures. As soon as the Duke began checking on adopted children, rumors spread among the aristocrats that he was looking for a boy with dark hair, with blue eyes, so the aristocrats stopped taking orphans from shelters, afraid of meeting the missing boy. Recently, the director asked to spread a rumor a teacher told in several places that the son of a deceased duke allegedly lives in their establishment. Lady Mullen began to worry that they might be caught selling the wrong child. The duke was known to be a terrible man. Moreover, it was not someone else who needed this, but the famous Duke himself, but the director asked the teacher to stop talking nonsense. The Duke had never seen this child, and how would he understand that you, the boy, are the Duke's real son? So she asked you to just not panic. Ellie managed to overhear this conversation. Now she knew that the Duke would soon appear at the orphanage to finally save the boy. All the aristocrats were incredibly afraid of the Duke, and no one could resist his will for him. They were just pathetic liars. Did they seriously think that the smell of some herbs could stop him? The Duke quickly uncovered their deception. The trembling youth asked the venerable gentleman for forgiveness, confessing that they had committed only one mortal sin. They asked for reconciliation only once, and supposedly they really did not recognize the Duke when he appeared before them. The assistant took pity and offered the master to listen to their words, because he didn't come here just to kill everyone. They themselves admitted that they had committed a mortal sin, but the Duke was not the kind of person who could leave such immoral acts unattended. Holding the sword tightly in his hands, he ordered them to answer immediately if none of them wanted to die. Where was that child? The boy's mistress sat before him. She had no idea that the little servant really was the missing child of the deceased Duke. She said that right now the boy is in an orphanage under the care of a very good friend of hers. She supposedly thought that the child would be better off in an orphanage than in such a terrible, cruel place next to her. The Duke understood everything. She simply tried to hide the boy in the orphanage, and these people themselves asked for their death. When he was about to end it, the aristocrats covered their heads with their hands and screamed loudly, imagining imminent death. At this point, the assistant decided to turn to the gentleman, because there might be some truth in this girl's words. He reported that a few days ago he received an interesting message containing important information. The letter said that the missing child they were looking for was currently in a northern orphanage called Saint. For some reason, he decided to tell about this only now, when they had already dug through all the shelters in the empire. But this shelter existed only in words. In fact, there are a lot of orphans living there, many of whom are actually sold there, so the assistant was going to check the information first. The Duke certainly didn't like his willful behavior, and he was overcome with a wild desire to kill his assistant right then and there. The conversation was about the most secretive shelter of the empire, and the young man confirmed that it really did exist in a remote area. The Duke decided to punish the assistant later, but for now he ordered a letter to be sent to the shelter, warning that they would arrive there soon. Before that, it was necessary to quickly deal with these two, whom the Duke was unlikely to want to leave alive. He dealt harshly with lying aristocrats and was known throughout the empire as the most cold-blooded Duke. The director was very angry today. She was going crazy with huge debts. Now there are sick children in the orphanage. Walking excitedly around the office, she was outraged at how the boy managed to fall into the lake in such snowy weather. The worst thing was that the Duke was about to arrive at the orphanage, and she definitely couldn't show him the sick children. They need to be brought back into shape, at least given cheaper medicine. It's a shame, of course, but it looks like she'll have to sell one of the stones anyway. There was nowhere to go. The director, in despair, climbed into the closet where the magic stones were kept. Her hands trembled. How could this happen? The cabinet was always locked, but now one large stone was missing. Could it be that one of the children dared to steal it? But when this happened, she was constantly in her office. Ellie was very worried about Damien. How high was his temperature if the cold, wet towel heated up instantly? She carefully wet a towel with ice water and applied it to the boy's head. He didn't want her to go too far. She didn't want to be alone in this lonely room more than anything. It was no wonder he was cranky, but as soon as she took his hand, he seemed to fall asleep almost instantly. Ellie thought he might feel a little better thanks to the mana stone she stole from the director, but his temperature still wouldn't go down. Carson was feeling bad now too, but Damien was feeling much worse, although to be honest, Carson's condition was worrying her less and less. The boy buried his cheek in her cool hand, muttering something barely audibly under his breath. How could anyone mock such a pure and kind boy? He finally managed to fall asleep. Ellie decided to quickly leave the room while the boy was asleep in order to quickly finish important things. She urgently needed to get some food for a snack. He needed to restore his energy, and if you starve yourself, you definitely won't gain weight. As the girl carefully left the room, the director caught her by surprise and loudly asked what she was doing there. It was strange that the headmistress appeared so unexpectedly, and her voice was, as usual, rude and hateful. Damien fell ill. Ellie hastened to inform him that she was just looking after him and was now going to get him some fresh, cold water. It was as if she knew that the girl's pocket contained the very same stolen stone that she had definitely taken for her new friend. Ellie didn't think she would notice so quickly that the small stone lying in the far corner was missing, and decided to blame it all on Carson. The director said that not only had the girl stolen the stone, but now she was also brazenly lying, just like her mother. Ellie felt very angry and asked why the director decided to remember her mother. The lady burst out laughing. She took pity on this girl because she was a quiet and calm child, but did she really decide to repay her kindness by stealing? The director was already imagining how she would teach this little thief a lesson so that she would never dare enter her office again. Ellie closed her eyes. The director was constantly scolding the children, and she was sure that now she would raise her hand to her. She opened her eyes in fear and saw Damien in front of her. But how did he get here, when he had such a high temperature? The boy shielded his girlfriend with his small, fragile body and loudly told the director not to hit her. It seemed that after that incident, a little predator woke up in this boy, and he wasn't even afraid of the adult mistress. He shouted loudly that if the mistress hit Ellie, he would not let it go, and soon she would also face punishment. Damien, standing on the threshold of this new understanding, felt his determination grow stronger, and then Ellie's words became the key that opened the door to an unknown part of himself. The headmistress was surprised that this little boy really decided to interfere in something that wasn't his business. She knew that if this little fool latched on, it would never let go. But when he was angry, he didn't care at all who was in front of him. While the director stood there in bewilderment, Lady Mullins screamed. A letter had arrived from the Duke himself, and he was supposed to visit the orphanage very soon. The director ordered everyone to quickly clean up, change the children's clothes, bring all the children with black hair and blue eyes to her office, and decided to deal with these two later. She hadn't even had time to prepare for the master's arrival, and Ellie clearly heard, the Duke and you, the boys with black hair and blue eyes. For some reason, the director wasn't going to send Damien, but he also had black hair and blue eyes. She certainly had no intention of showing the child to the venerable Duke in such a state, lest she be disgraced in front of the master. At that moment, the boy became really ill and collapsed almost unconscious into the arms of the little girl. The headmistress warned that the sick child needed rest first and foremost, and this silly girl should look after him properly. Holding his trembling little body tightly, Ellie whispered that everything would definitely be fine and that he would get better soon. She knew that when the Duke arrived, she would definitely be able to help him finally meet his family. And only this gentleman can influence his future destiny. The main character will be able to live a happy life, full of care. The teachers came out and bowed to greet the venerable Duke, and such a titled man had never crossed the threshold of this infamous place. An isolated area, far from the city center, inaccessible without a carriage or horse, it would hardly be considered a good place for children. The Duke did not come here for this purpose. He had sent a letter to the director in advance to warn him of his visit. The notification of his visit came quite unexpectedly, so the teacher reported everything to the lady belatedly, but she should appear soon. Without further ado, the gentleman asked where the child he had been looking for a long time was now. In fact, the headmistress ordered the teachers to keep their mouths shut, so they couldn't even answer anything. The orphanage was in complete chaos, and the Duke no longer wanted to listen to empty talk, deciding to find the boy himself. It was very cold in the shelter. The master was angry. How the children live in such a cold place, and if it turns out that the boy is not here, they will have to deal with this place. Walking confidently down the corridor of the orphanage, the Duke suddenly heard the loud cry of a little girl. A little girl with long hair sat right on the floor and cried loudly, holding her head as if she was in great pain. The Duke, without hesitation, took the girl by the hands to help her up and asked if she had hit her head. Ellie had incredibly clear green eyes, and she admitted that it was difficult for her to get up on her own due to the severe pain. Ellie had already thought everything through long ago. She fell specifically in this place because she knew that the Duke would definitely notice her. The assistant didn't even guess that the girl knew that a respectable gentleman was standing in front of her, and it was impossible not to believe her innocent eyes. Ellie confidently asked if these people really had come to take one of the boys. She quickly managed to find out that it was indeed the Duke, and she asked the guests to go to the director's office. After all, they were definitely looking for a child with black hair and blue eyes, and according to her, all 5 boys even showed up as guests. The Duke was surprised that the director was really here, but then why did the teachers pretend that this was not the case, and seemed to be trying to stall for time? This needed to be clarified, but the gentleman knew one thing: what was happening here had really spoiled his mood. Ellie bowed low before the Duke, and he thanked the little girl for the important information she had provided. Now it was possible to go straight to the director's office without any problems to find out what was going on here. The assistant noticed Ellie and saw that this girl was very strange, and he had never met children like her before. It was the first time he had seen one of the children come face to face with the Duke without bursting into tears. No, there was one more person in his memory, the one who didn't even blink an eye when he met the cold-blooded Duke. This was a very strange story. For some reason, the assistant remembered it just now. The director politely greeted the gentleman, thanking him for deciding to visit their magnificent shelter. There were 4 boys standing next to her, children with black hair and blue eyes. She was sure that among them was definitely the child he was looking for. As soon as the Duke entered her office, the boys began to cry loudly, and the director could not even calm them down. It was strange. Usually they were always silent. Duke later warned his friend he put his son's mana into the stone, and if the child appears nearby, the stone will emit a reaction. But the stone gave me no signals. The Duke realized that it seemed the lady was lying, and he could easily kill her right on the spot. The director began to plead that she was telling the truth, and confidently stated that the boy was definitely among those 4 children. Oddly enough, the girl who bumped into him in the hallway said all 5 boys would be in the principal's office, but there were only 4 here. This means that one child is definitely missing, and this is because a little girl definitely could not have come up with such a brilliant plan. The director did not understand what was being discussed, and the Duke was not going to listen to her lies. Perhaps the fear of death will frighten her. The Duke took out his sword and asked again where the child was, whom she was so carefully hiding. And if she lies, he will kill her right now, and it is better for her to tell the whole truth. At this time, Ellie was sitting in the room with Damien. She did not leave his side for a single step, and impatiently waited for the Duke to figure out everything. Judging by the loud noise in the corridor, the gentleman is about to go check all the rooms in search of that same boy with dark hair and blue eyes. And it seemed like everything was unfolding exactly as she had planned, but for some reason she felt incredible sadness, although she knew perfectly well that it would only be better for the boy. What she said later was that Damien would no longer have to be sick or suffer, because soon his life would become completely different. On the first day of their meeting, she made a tender promise that she would help him meet his family, and this would happen very soon. Ellie kept her word. The door opened and a respectable gentleman appeared in the room, whom the boy had never seen before in his life. Could it be that this man in expensive clothes is his family? What if he is the person who will give him a happy life and finally take him away from this terrible place? The gentleman with scarlet eyes, black hair, and a rebellious expression made a strange impression on the boy. Rather, he was more afraid of him. The Duke always acted very emotionally, according to the assistant. This was the first time he had acted like this since the death of his mistress, and he was sure that he would never see him like this again. The Duke had heard that the boy was still very young, but he did not expect to see such a thin child in front of him. What's strange is that next to his bed sat that same little girl, whom he definitely didn't just bump into as soon as he crossed the threshold of the orphanage. As soon as the gentleman approached her, the boy suddenly jumped out of bed and shouted loudly that he did not even dare to get acquainted, and did not even dare to approach. Ellie held the sick Damien, hoping that he wouldn't collapse on the floor right now, but the boy sternly asked her not to look at his friend with that look. Now he didn't care at all who was standing in front of him, but if the gentleman dared to offend her, he promised that he would not leave him alone. So small, he behaved like a real forest predator. The Duke smiled and asked who he could protect in such a weak state. Suddenly, the Mana Stone, as if awakening from a centuries-long sleep, filled the entire room with pulsating blue light. This light did not simply illuminate, it pierced, enveloped, seemed to penetrate into the very essence of the Duke. At that moment, when reality was distorted and absorbed by a mystical radiance, he understood. With a startling clarity that could only come from the depths of despair and hope, he realized it was he, standing before him, living, breathing, radiating the same otherworldly power as the once silent artifact. The sign the Duke had been waiting for, the sign that pierced the veil of despair, bringing with it a fragile but undeniable glimmer of redemption. He finally found the missing son of the deceased Duke Clyder in this abandoned and forgotten orphanage. Everything would have been just fine, but the boy fell unconscious again. Right on the floor, fortunately, Ellie managed to catch him. The Duke asked the girl not to worry. The boy had simply regained the life energy that his father had previously taken from him. On the contrary, this stone will help him recover and become much stronger. It's like medicine. Ellie felt the temperature really begin to drop instantly, and now the Duke was absolutely sure that he had finally found the right child. Now he would like to hear the director's explanation of why the poor skinny boy was in such a terrible condition. If his answer is not satisfactory, then all the teachers had better leave this place without saying a word. The ladies rushed to prepare the adoption papers and call the director, and everything happened exactly as described in that very book. A man who can instill fear in people with just one word and a sharp look, the noble Lord Duke Schutz. Finally, the long-awaited moment had arrived, which the little girl had been patiently waiting for, but for some reason she still felt very sad. People are already more afraid of the Duke than the ghost, so the assistant asked the master to at least not talk with such a cold face. Even the teachers all ran away. Even the Duke's son fell off his feet in any case. His rude expression wasn't enough for him. He also decided to scare him. Would the boy really decide to adopt after that? Luckily, Damien simply fell asleep quickly from fatigue. A sick child cannot lie on the floor, and the Duke asked his assistant to bring a wet towel. They carefully laid the boy on the bed, and Ellie carefully covered him with a warm blanket. The Duke noticed that the girl had initially acted as if she knew that he was looking for this particular boy. But how could she have known about this? The gentleman was visiting the distant northern lands online for the first time, and the girl immediately understood that he was asking these questions for a reason. Right now, he decided to test her. She had to answer correctly so that the Duke would never guess if she made a mistake. She would have to live on the street just like in the original, but she couldn't lie either. Ellie told him that the gentleman was right, but she knew everything from the very beginning, but she still decided not to finish telling him some information. She allegedly learned about everything from the director's words. The lady said to carefully inform the gentleman that the child with black hair and blue eyes was in another room. It turns out that the little girl specifically mentioned that there were 5 children, not 4, and only for this reason the Duke was able to find him. If the Duke found out that Ellie had deliberately bumped into him, he would definitely start to suspect her, and he would definitely notice the clumsy lie right away. So she said she just thought this boy might be the kid he was looking for, and she just wanted him to go around the shelter and see for himself first. Surely the gentleman realized that the local teachers were not looking after them at all, and now he knew how everything was arranged here. The children did all the work at the shelter themselves. There were cases where little Betty's hands were frozen from washing, and Tommy even cut himself with a sharp knife. While teachers calmly leave their children alone and go to the casino to have fun and gamble there, Ellie just wanted the gentleman to see with his own eyes all the important problems of the shelter, and only he could change something here. The gentleman listened attentively to the little girl and loudly asked what the name of this brave child was. Ellie wasn't sure she gave her name, but now she had absolutely nothing to hide in front of the Duke. She tried to make sure that the children in the orphanage lived happily, and without fear, she named the name of this little sick boy. The assistant brought in the director, who was shaking with fear because the Duke himself had personally asked her to come into the room. The lady understood that it was the little girl who had blabbed everything to him, and if this was really so, then the most terrible punishment awaited her. The gentleman said that he was going to adopt this child. All the documents needed to be prepared, but that was not all. He also decided to take the little girl next to him. Did he really decide to make her his adopted daughter? But the Duke's plans were completely different. He was going to make her his daughter-in-law. Ellie couldn't understand anything. Only the main character was supposed to get together with the main character. But why did the Duke decide to take her? Damien squeezed her hand with his small hand and quietly asked her not to go anywhere. He wanted everything to be fine with him. The boy was almost pain-free, and he didn't want to be afraid that she was looking after him only out of pity. Although not much time had passed, Ellie had truly become attached to him, and frankly speaking, the thought that they would not have to part thanks to the Duke made her happy. The director was outraged that this nasty girl supposedly couldn't be taken in, and how he even decided to take her as a daughter-in-law. She knew that if she left with the Duke now, she would certainly tell him everything, and she had to stop it by any means necessary. Pointing her finger at the girl, she said that her mother had tried to rob the Count himself. And this little, seemingly innocent girl is actually the daughter of a real thief. The story of the thief, whose actions shocked the entire empire, was known to many. One lady skillfully bypassed the strict security and quietly entered the imperial palace. Having stolen the emperor's precious treasures from there, upon learning of this, he gathered a huge number of people to catch her, but he never succeeded in doing so. After some time, that woman was caught in another county. They say that she was even hanged in the Count's castle so that no one else would ever be able to touch the treasures of the emperor himself. But this was the first time the Duke had heard that the legendary thief had left behind a little daughter. Therefore, the director insisted that the gentleman should not do this, because if he took this girl as a daughter-in-law, he would dishonor himself. The gentleman was not the kind of person to easily give in to the opinions of others, and this lady talked too much. He was not going to listen to another word from a man who was even worse than a dog, and asked his assistant to get rid of her immediately. The director was completely powerless here. All she could do was finally shut her lying mouth and remain silent. Now everything depended only on the little girl. The Duke knelt down in front of her and sincerely asked if she was ready to go with him. Ellie didn't expect the venerable gentleman to suddenly make such a decision, and even less did she want to stay in this dirty, cold shelter. Before she left this place forever, the girl put forward one condition: to immediately fire all the teachers of this orphanage. The distraught lady began to scream loudly. The girl was talking nonsense, but it was brave to receive an offer from the Duke and even put forward conditions. Even if they start a new life with the Duke together with the boy, the other children will continue to suffer in the orphanage. It was for this reason that the girl asked that all the teachers be fired and punished, and that this place be turned into a good shelter so that children would never again be used as commodities here. The Duke promised to fulfill her conditions without fail, as he saw with his own eyes the chaos that was happening here. He immediately ordered his assistant to immediately begin the process of confiscating the licenses of all teachers here, and this was no longer avoidable. The director still begged not to believe this insidious girl, but it was too late. She herself was to blame for everything. The girl didn't even think that her important request would be fulfilled so quickly, and from now on everything in this shelter would be just as she wanted. Having fulfilled the main conditions, the Duke once again asked if she was ready to go with him. He felt that it was not without reason that the little girl decided to help her master, and what's more, during this time they had developed a wonderful relationship. I wonder why the Duke decided to take her away too. Maybe there is some kind of catch in this. Ellie didn't know the reason, but it would be even better. She would be uneasy if she let Damien go just like that, but now she would have the opportunity to protect him. Until their meeting with the real main character, she promised herself and the boy to be there, politely shaking the Duke's hand. The director and her assistant were quickly expelled from the place, so until a new director arrives, the orphanage will be looked after by people hired by the Duke. The gentleman told the little girl that, of course, tomorrow there would be new teachers here who would protect and take good care of the orphans. Looking at this place for the last time, Ellie was happy finally. The little children could live peacefully and happily. Could it really be that she, a very young girl, managed to do something incredibly kind for the benefit of poor children? Some things were strange. There were too many coincidences to call it all a banal accident, and at some point the Duke even wondered if she was the Emperor's puppet. And this girl not only did not immediately accept his offer, but was not even afraid to set her own important condition to help other children. She was truly glad that this terrible place had finally undergone changes, although here he could no longer judge, because he himself had agreed to her condition. He was quickly able to figure out what was bothering the girl so much, and he remembered his noble wife, who was also kind and pure in heart. To say goodbye, baby, you hugged your beloved friend tightly. She felt that she would be leaving very soon. The girl asked if they would never see each other again, but she had never seen any other girls who would leave forever. Ellie promised to return soon, gave her word of honor, and many children ran out to see their beloved, kind friend off to the orphanage. While she was saying goodbye to all the children, the Duke stopped in the winter snow-covered courtyard to think about something. He knew that just one look would not be enough to kill someone, but he had another plan for that. He needed at least a sword. All this time, Damien watched the stranger who decided to take him away, and anxiety immediately arose in the boy's soul. For him, he was a complete stranger, and when they were alone together, he decided to ask why this gentleman was taking him and Ellie. It is not surprising that the boy asked such a serious question. Now he was worried not only about himself, but about his little friend. He looked at the Duke without any fear and wanted to know what this man who promised to give them happiness was really planning. The Duke warned that the art of communication would be the first lesson the young master would begin to learn when they returned to the estate. But the boy did not want to hear unnecessary words. He asked to immediately answer why the Duke decided to take them together. Only the gentleman knew that he was not taking him away at all, but returning him to where he really should be now. The time will come when the boy will soon find out for himself what truly belongs to him. Right now, he was no different from a wild little animal who was used to a bad life and humiliation. But if he returns to his rightful place, then his look will change and become only more determined, and then he will definitely be able to protect those he wants. Adults are much more dangerous than children, so it was difficult for the boy to trust them, and for some reason, he did not want to follow this man. Most of all, the boy was afraid that he could not protect the girl because of his own weakness, but now he had to go to where he belonged. He asked Ellie if she was ready to go with him, because she promised that she would always be there. And now that he will live with the Duke, will he finally be able to protect those he wants, namely this kind little lady? Demian only asked for one thing, that the Duke never force Ellie to work, under any circumstances. The Duke was perplexed. This girl was still a small child, and the boy might not even think about such nonsense. And before setting off to a new life, he warned that if the master offended her, he would definitely get what he deserved. He, too, was always kind to his wife. While with others he seemed to become a different person, it's hard to believe, but every action of this child screamed that he was Clyder's son. Flocks of crows circled above the treetops of the gloomy forest, their black silhouettes drawing ominous patterns on the pale gray sky. The Duke's carriage moved slowly along a narrow, barely visible path winding between mossy tree trunks. During this time, Ellie had already fallen asleep, and woken up Demian was sitting next to her, who was also sleeping, but most importantly, now he looked completely healthy. Suddenly, a large raven flew out of the thicket, flew up to the carriage, gliding silently through the air, and stopped at the window where Ellie was sitting. The forest was incredibly gloomy, as if ghosts were about to come out. It turned out to be scarier here than Ellie had imagined, and there were definitely monsters here. The raven's night-black eyes stared at the girl, reflecting the dim light. In her stillness, in her intense gaze, one could sense something more than simple curiosity. It seemed like he wanted to say something. Maybe his presence was not accidental. Ellie even thought that this huge raven understood her. They even met eyes, but it was hard to believe. Before them appeared a palace, the embodiment of power and splendor, woven from cold marble and shining gold. Gazes, full of mixed feelings of awe and hope, were riveted to the majestic structure, and fortunately, the past of the orphanage was left behind. The servants froze at their posts. Whispers could be heard, anticipation of something significant, something new. Everyone knew that today they would meet the young master for the first time. Not just a boy, but a young gentleman whose fate was intertwined with a foggy past and an uncertain future. He came from an orphanage, a place that many preferred not to remember. Damien's eyes, large and frightened, curiously examined the unfamiliar place that this union of nobility and orphanhood concealed. The history of the estate was about to write a new, intriguing chapter. The Duke, tall and stately, with a face that seemed to express nothing but cold determination. The gentleman warned the butler. He brought not only the boy, but also a girl along with him to take the place of his daughter-in-law. Ellie agreed. It sounded strange, and she herself was as confused as the butler. The look demanded an explanation from the owner of the estate, but the Duke could not answer anything other than that it just happened that way. The butler sighed heavily, which meant that even the Duke's assistant had no significant measures that would influence his decision. Ellie started to get upset. It seemed like she wasn't welcome here, and no one had ever imagined that the gentleman from the shelter would take some unfamiliar girl. Her very name seemed to carry the imprint of other people's sins, and rumors spread faster than wildfire in the foster families to which she was given. As soon as she stepped into her new home, she felt the attitude change. Smiles faded, glances became prickly, and whispers seemed to follow her everywhere. When she was first given to a foster family, she was much younger than she is now, and every time before meeting a new family, she was overcome with pleasant excitement. But how stupid it was. She knew that this would not happen again. Now she was only going to prepare for the future and did not need a warm family, so no matter what words were said to her, it decided to simply not pay attention to it. Someone said that there were no suitable maids to help the young lady, but she promised to behave quietly, and upon arrival she already had to do even the nasty work herself. She didn't want to become someone who needed another person to help her, but the butler promised to do everything so that the master wouldn't have to worry. The maid warned Ante's assistant that the Duke's close relatives and vassals were already waiting. It seems the rumors have spread too quickly, and there are as many chattering mouths as listening ears. Earhart decided to meet them a little later, first to rest after the journey, and ordered the butler to personally take care of the children's room. The children's hearts began to beat faster. 2 new inhabitants, 2 worlds, new people, and a completely alien place that was now supposed to become home. Relatives and vassals arrived very quickly. Ellie was sure that all these people threatened the boy's future. Although the venerable Duke adopted him, they would not establish full-fledged ties with each other anytime soon. This means that the trials for little Damien are not over yet, but most likely are just beginning. The warlike little heroine was absolutely not prepared to allow anything to go wrong in her good friend's life. At the main meeting, the aristocrats discussed a possible trick to replace the Mana Stone, since it was not that difficult to do. A problem has arisen. Relatives and vassals of the Clater family are trying to take away their trading company, and now suddenly the offspring of the deceased Duke appears. For the past 11 years, this largest company has been managed by the Ducal House of Schutz. It is simply unthinkable that the main trading company could now pass into the hands of some wanderer. The gentleman sitting at the head of the meeting loudly declared that they must find a solution as soon as possible. The aristocrats shared the Viscount's opinion, but there was no one among them who could cope with the Duke, and if they could obey him, they would have done so long ago. The Viscount was angry. It was simply impossible to talk to these old people. How could they say such things when they risked losing everything? There was a loud noise in the meeting room, and even from outside the gentleman's ears were already hurting. All those present greeted the Duke who appeared, and it seemed to him that each of them had something to say today. He decided not to waste time and asked those gathered to move on to the main question as they had already heard. He had found Clyder's son. The gentleman laughed maliciously. "I assure you such an event is worth celebrating. And what is the name of the young gentleman?" The Duke named the boy. It was simply magnificent, but everyone was worried whether he would now lead the Clater family. Duke again. Now these people want to draw a line between Damien and his family, and none of them are friendly. If that little, still insignificant child inherits the Clyder name, these people will be ready to tear him apart immediately. Moreover, the vassals and distant relatives of the Clater family will want to do exactly the same. The Duke said that the boy had become friends with a very extraordinary girl, and thinking that she would be useful, he brought her into the house. He announced that preparations were underway for the official succession process for both of them, and this news caused shock among those present. Earhart decided to spare no expense or support to ensure that these children could create the dignity of bearing the great Clyder name. Indignation poured in from all sides. The gentlemen were sure that this was simply unacceptable, and why should they worry about this child? By the Duke's decision, the 2 will become adopted children, and when they grow up, they will become engaged in the future. Everyone understood that no matter how small the child was, if the engagement took place, he would officially become one of the family members. Moreover, if Damien marries the girl chosen by the Duke personally, no one will be able to take away the Clater's company. Earhart knew that if he found the Duke's son, they would all want to get rid of him, or start pushing their daughters into the bride's place. Each of them swore an oath to sacrifice their lives for the good of the ducal house, and now they can only obey the will of the master. None of those gathered could believe that the Duke had decided to follow his clearly defined plan by letting an unknown girl into the house. The Viscount, of course, assumed that the Duke would not sit idly by, but the fact that he would even take away his daughter-in-law in advance was simply unthinkable. The enraged gentleman tried not to show his indignation and decided that he needed to find another way to fix everything. The butler led the children to their new room, and Ellie couldn't believe they were going to live here after the cold shelter. It was truly their luxurious room. The chandeliers were like precious stones that you just wanted to bite into. Ellie froze on the threshold, unable to contain her sigh of admiration. The new room was a real fairy tale. It was so far from what she had known before, so different from the gray walls of the orphanage and the cramped rooms in her previous homes. The maids warned her that the young master was now with the butler, and from today on they would accompany her. The main maid, Loina, promised to make every effort to ensure that the young lady did not experience the slightest inconvenience during her stay here. Ellie had never spoken to adults informally before, and she also felt a little uncomfortable with the fact that they called her young mistress here. Loina smiled and said that soon the girl would get used to the presence of her maids and their good attitude. The friendly lady welcomed the new residents of the house, 3 sweet girls named Ivana, May, and Aisel. Learning the names won't be that hard. Ellie greeted the maids politely. She was very pleased to meet them. The ladies admired her. The girl was incredibly kind and sincere, and it was good that the Duke chose her. When the introductions were over, Loina invited the young lady to take a bath after the long journey. The maid was nearby the whole time, and Elle was worried that if she hesitated, everyone would probably not laugh. The ladies couldn't contain their admiration. The young lady was simply incredibly sweet. One of the maids asked Ellie if she had her favorite scented oil, but the girl didn't even understand what they were talking about. She didn't know about scented oils, she just wanted to wash in warm water, because the water in the shelter was always very cold. The maids were upset. This little girl didn't even know how to take a hot bath, and how could she know about scented oils? They promised to do their best to ensure that the young lady found her favorite scented oil. For her part, Ellie promised to do everything to avoid causing these lovely ladies too much trouble. It was simply impossible to believe. Everyone treated her with special respect, and Ellie felt like the heroine of a fairy tale. During the bath, several people helped her at once, and it took him even longer to take a bath than usual. But Elle had been using warm water and scented oils for a long time, and only now did she feel what freshness meant. Lying in a warm, cozy bed, she didn't even want to go anywhere, but for some reason Demian was twitching and tossing and turning violently. The boy sadly admitted that he was a little scared when he found himself in a new place, and they even managed to cut his hair. He probably just felt uneasy with his hair so short, and now he's embarrassed. The boy's heart beat even faster now Ellie had become even more beautiful, and affectionately poking him on the cheek, the girl said that the butler had probably told him the same thing. Today she heard from the head maid that in the future they would become real spouses. Being married meant loving only one person your whole life, but the boy didn't quite understand what that meant. Ellie didn't know either, but one day her mother told her about marriage and asked for a happy family life. When you fall in love with someone, you feel a tickling sensation inside, and it feels like your whole body is getting hot. The heart beats wildly at the sight of a loved one, whom you want to look at every second without looking away. Ellie enthusiastically told the boy what true love was, and at that moment he realized something. Although it was difficult to find a suitable description, Demian experienced exactly the same feelings when he saw this little girl. From confusion and embarrassment, the boy began to hiccup all over the room, and Ellie wondered if he was scared again. Literally in one morning the question of their marriage was decided, and naturally, the boy will be very confused. Ellie told him that she would help him find his family, but in the end she became his family herself, and it looks like she was specifically pursuing this goal. Demian continued to shout loudly and shout at the whole room, and his face turned red, as if he was about to burst. Ellie decided to be careful. Maybe he was overtired, but someday everyone here would find out that she was the daughter of a thief. And then, even though the Duke himself brought her here, her fate would remain anyone's guess, so she decided to behave as quietly as possible. In order not to embarrass the boy, she decided to sit on the other side of the bed. Fortunately, it was very large there. He himself said that he was very hot, but when Ellie moved away from him, he became even more worried. She thought he would be happy about his new life, but for some reason Demian looked more and more worried and scared with every second. Ellie suggested that perhaps he was simply afraid that he would have nightmares again, like in the orphanage, since this place was completely unfamiliar to him. In the original, I said that he got used to it almost immediately, but in real life everything turned out completely differently. Ellie hugged the boy carefully, asking him to be patient for a little while. He would definitely get used to it soon and would never be afraid again. Still, this boy was incredibly sweet, even when he was scared, but Ellie knew that everything would definitely be fine in his life. A lot has happened today. Demian has gone through many difficult days, but now all his suffering will be repaid many times over, and he will be happy. So let today and tomorrow night, let his dreams be filled with stars instead of nightmares. The children's cheeks were flushed with warmth, their fingers clenched into fists, and their faces were frozen in complete calm. That same evening, the Viscount's assistant managed to find out that the girl the Duke had brought was a commoner, and that moreover, her deceased mother was a famous thief. Surely he had heard of her. It was the same woman who had escaped, taking all of His Majesty's treasures with her. The Duke brought home a strange couple, a wandering fellow and a thief's daughter, and they are definitely suited to each other. The Viscount thanked him for the valuable information. The messenger had obtained the information very quickly, and for him this was great praise. He was generous and paid handsomely for the work done, warning that his services would definitely be needed again soon. The Viscount was thinking up his own plan, which required informing the Emperor about everything as soon as possible. It cannot be that the Duke was unaware of her origin. Then if the Emperor finds out about it, he will confiscate everything that was left after Clater, along with the property. Something had to be thought up, and if everything went smoothly, the Viscount would be able to profit and at the same time get rid of this vile girl. The next morning was special. Little Ellie was preparing for a very important meeting. The maids carefully chose their outfits, and today the Duke must introduce Ellie to the high-ranking people and vassals of the duchy. Ellie froze, not believing her eyes. Soft pink, iridescent, with a barely noticeable pearly shine. Never in the walls of the shelter, not in any of the rare houses she had been to, had she seen anything like it. She didn't know that she could be so cute if she was dressed up a little in a pretty dress. Rowena warned that the young master would come as soon as he finished his preparations, and she could wait for him in the bedroom. It turns out that accepting someone's care is not easy either. The maids constantly admired her sweet face. The girl was impatiently awaiting the appearance of the young master. At that moment, the junior maid entered. She warned that Viscount Corbino wanted to greet young Mrs. Ellie and say hello to her personally. This man had come here either to take his place in line before the official introduction or to do some reconnaissance, and Ellie knew it perfectly well. Despite the headmaid's insistence that the young lady was not yet ready, the Viscount entered the living room first. Ellie felt alarm from his gaze. He hadn't just come here to take his place in line. He was definitely up to something. She smiled sweetly and decided to play his game, warning him that she had just finished getting ready and was ready to chat. By the way, the Viscount did not come empty-handed, and admitted that he wanted to show the young lady something. The box contained a valuable mineral called Blue Hope, a mana stone that could only be found on his lands. The Viscount had time to find out who this little girl was, and he could not ignore the fact that she was the daughter of a thief. He came up with a grand plan. It would be enough to simply catch the girl stealing for the Duchess to kick her out of the house. The Viscount allegedly kindly told about a stone with the help of which anyone could use powerful magic. Suddenly, he asked the headmaid to leave the room, as if he just wanted to talk to the young lady alone. Rowena did not dare to contradict the will of the Viscount, who even assured that he was not going to do anything stupid, and did the headmaid really not trust him? Before leaving, she looked confidently at Ellie, and knew that this girl could cope if something happened. The Viscount waited until the maid left the room, and waited impatiently for the moment when he could fulfill his cunning friend's wish. This stone was truly very beautiful for some reason. It reminded little Ellie so much of Damien's eyes. The Viscount stated that this was still not an object that the young lady had the right to look at. He immediately started being rude as soon as they were alone. Well, that was quite expected. The gentleman called himself a magnanimous man, and he granted her permission to contemplate this stone for as long as the young Leary wanted. As soon as she had seen enough, she should send him back with his maid, but now he quickly decided to take his leave. It was all very strange. He decided something himself, did something himself, and quickly left the room. His maid admitted that although the Viscount said so, in fact he personally chose the stone especially for the young lady. The maid tried to attract the girl's attention. All this time, Rowena stood near the open door, and it was already time for Ellie to go out. As soon as she heard that Damien was ready, she quickly jumped up from the sofa and headed towards Tver, not paying attention to such a precious stone. The Viscount gave the maid special instructions, but for some reason the girl did not fall for their tricks. The Viscount had asked the maid in advance to time it and put the stone in her pocket, as if the girl was stupid and wouldn't even notice anything. The maid couldn't do it, and she couldn't even imagine how to slip the valuables into the girl's pocket. But if not now, then she will definitely not have another chance to plant a stone, and she needs to act quickly. Ellie immediately sensed something was wrong, and was very attentive when the Viscount's maid came very close. For some reason, the lady walked very slowly and stopped dead in her tracks right in front of the girl. The stone needed to be placed right now, but to choose the right moment, the maid decided to pretend that she had tripped right in front of her. At that moment, she held the stone in her hand, and fortunately she managed to put the precious thing in the pocket of her dress. The maid even had to actually fall to ensure her trick was successful and went unnoticed. Lowena asked if the girl was okay because when the maid fell, she grabbed onto her dress. The head maid promised to have a good talk with the lady, but fortunately for her, none of them noticed anything. Ellie seemed to sense that something strange was happening here and quickly approached the fallen lady. The girl politely noted that the maid's clothes were dirty, probably because she had fallen. The lady was frightened, wondering if the girl had managed to notice anything, and said in a trembling voice that she was completely fine. The most important thing is that the girl doesn't start checking her pockets anytime soon, where the planted stone was currently lying. She was sure that she had succeeded, and soon this girl would be accused of theft in front of everyone. Ellie stood before the assembled aristocrats with great generosity and bowed politely. Everyone started whispering. She didn't even have a last name. The gentleman couldn't believe that an ordinary commoner would really become the bride of Claytor's son. On the one hand, they reacted much more calmly than the young lady expected, at least no one started insulting her. Damien immediately noticed that these people were unfriendly towards his friend, and they had just been whispering. The Duke warned the boy that until he got his place back he had to remain quiet. Ellie started to worry. The boy looked very gloomy, but could something really have happened to him? At that moment, the Viscount appeared in the living room, who immediately turned everything towards the Duke so that he would give him a minute of attention. Could it really be something urgent, since he couldn't wait for the meeting? But the Viscount assured him that it was about the processing of the Blue Hope that he had spoken about earlier. According to him, it was completed just yesterday, so he wanted to show the gentleman the result as soon as possible. Erhard agreed and asked the Viscount to bring the stone, which for some reason he was eager to show. The maid began to whisper something to the gentleman. The Viscount pretended that something unexpected had happened. The Duke stood waiting, wondering if something had happened, but he had noticed long ago that the gentleman had been behaving strangely from the very beginning. But the maid says the Blue Hope has disappeared, that precious stone that for some reason could not be followed. The Viscount began to shout loudly, asking how the maid could allow such a thing to happen, and who was the last person to hold the stone in their hands. She honestly admitted that the last time she showed the stone was to that young lady, and she never saw it again. It happened when they went to say hello to the young lady. The Viscount turned around and said that he was very sorry that the Dukes had to say such a thing. Some rumors reached him, news about that famous thief who had invaded the Count's domain. The Viscount declared that the young lady, or rather the little girl, was the daughter of that very woman, and he could not ignore this fact. It's no wonder. The Duke had already figured out why the Viscount suddenly started talking about the blue one, hoping that he did it for a reason. Now he suggested, if the gentleman did not mind, to search the little girl standing next to him. Under the guise of noble courtesy and respect, the Viscount bowed before the gentleman and once again insisted on his request. Yes, her mother was indeed a famous thief, but Ellie admitted that she did not steal anything. This is exactly what the Viscount wanted to check. He did it on purpose, in front of many witnesses who would later be able to confirm everything. Damien didn't believe that his little friend would dare to steal something here in the first days, and it certainly wasn't about her. Before the Viscount searched her, Ellie asked him to apologize if anything was found on her. The gentleman had to accept the conditions of this impudent girl. The Duke gave his permission, and the girl even agreed herself. The maid apologized to the young lady in advance for making her so upset, but there was nothing to be done. She was sure the stone was in her right pocket, but to her great surprise, the pocket was completely empty. The Viscount was already mentally celebrating his victory, how easily he dealt with this girl, but the maid said that there was nothing in her pockets. He didn't even believe it right away and asked if she had searched her properly and how something like this could have happened. Without a second's hesitation, he rushed towards the girl to check her pockets himself. It was true that it was laid in her pockets, but what does that mean? Didn't this girl steal something precious? The guests looked on in confusion. The Viscount made it clear that this girl had stolen the sacred relic. Enraged, the gentleman could not contain his anger in his hands. He grabbed the girl by the shoulders and screamed when she dared to hide the blue stone. His hand, squeezing the girl's shoulders, was suddenly grasped by another strong and confident hand of the Duke, like a rock, unbreakable and firm, blocking the Viscount's path. The Duke's gaze, piercing and icy, spoke without words, leaving not the slightest hope. Ellie couldn't even imagine that the Duke would stand up for her in front of everyone, despite the fact that the truth had just been revealed. She was the daughter of a famous thief. The Duke warned, "Right now, the Viscount looks like a man who tried to pull a dirty trick. Does he really think the Duke doesn't suspect anything?" It was the look of a man who saw the absurdity and pitiful futility of the Viscount's attempts, all his vulnerability hidden under the mask of aggression. The Viscount pleaded that he was simply worried about the gentleman, since the circumstances were such that he supposedly could not even suspect her. There was definitely a meaning in his words, only a completely different one than in the current situation. He was the only one under suspicion. The Viscount was sure his pockets were empty and allowed his assistant to search him as much as he wanted on the Duke's orders. Ante slowly checked all his pockets, and miraculously, he still found the precious blue mana stone in his clothes. The Viscount couldn't believe his eyes. Where did he get the advice from that stone? It was as if the maid had planted it on the girl. The Viscount felt his body go limp, a tremor run through his limbs. The realization of his own mistake, its universal scale, struck with incredible force. All he could do was shout that he was not guilty of anything, but how good it was that for Ellie the story turned out to be so easy and fair. Now we can explain what happened, how it happened, taking advantage of the thief's daughter's dexterity, and how she quickly uncovered the maid's insidious plan. She quietly took the blue hope out of her pocket during the search, while the maid was trying to find something on her. Then she put the stone in her pocket, because adults should not behave so meanly to her, and she could be proud of her intelligence. It was fortunate that both the Viscount and the maid acted exactly as she had intended, and their thick clothing suited her plan perfectly. The Viscount realized that his behavior was not just absurd, it was catastrophic. The Duke said, "The gentleman must clearly understand that he will have to answer in full for the vile deception." This look was frozen with condemnation, a prediction of inevitable retribution for insolence and recklessness. Still, even though the Viscount was to blame, it was hard for Alla to look at the terrible consequences. If she had not done this, she would not have been able to protect the boy, as well as herself, from the imminent threat. Before this, she asked the Viscount and everyone else to apologize, and this was the main condition that she managed to set. The Duke spoke loudly. Everyone heard the words of the little girl and must obey immediately. It is unlikely that the respectable aristocrats wanted to apologize to the thief's daughter, but they had no other choice. Bowing before the venerable Duke and the young lady, the aristocrats loudly asked for forgiveness, admitting that they had behaved impolitely. The Duke would have liked to decide what to do with them now, but his assistant was busy, so he intended to talk about it after the meeting. He asked those who did not approve of this idea to calmly return to their seats, while the rest should understand their mistake. Now the gentleman could finally move on to the main topic of the meeting. In the Empire, there was a ban on commoners marrying into the nobility. Everyone knew this, so the Duke gathered the aristocrats together. The reason was simple. He wanted to find a home that would adopt the little girl so that they would not have any problems with the wedding. It remains to be seen which house would want to take her in, but the problem is, who would dare to take the daughter of a thief into their home? The aristocrats were silent, and since no one answered, the Duke simply had no other choice. In this case, he offered the little girl to choose a family that would adopt her, since in the future she would have to bear their name. For the first time in her life, Ellie had such a wonderful chance in the past. No family wanted someone like her to become a maid and playmate for their children. She was always called a disgrace, a girl who was impossible to talk to, and even when fathers wanted to find someone to talk to for their children, no one accepted her bad origins. Skeptical glances studied her, as if trying to discern in her the heir to her mother's talents. She learned to be invisible, quiet as a ghost, trying to be useful, working hard to earn at least a tiny bit of favor. The past, like an invisible chain, pulled her back, condemning her to eternal loneliness and other people's condemnation. And every time it seemed that she was about to find her corner where she would be accepted as she was, history repeated itself. Mom knew how hard it was for her daughter, but she asked her to be patient a little longer. She believed that one day Ellie would become a child who would be surrounded by love and care. Mother always said how much love she received at birth. At first, Ellie condemned her mother for her unworthy lifestyle, but in the end, she was the only one who truly loved her all this time. And since she knew anyway that none of these people would perceive her as a real daughter, she decided to just think that she was temporarily causing someone inconvenience. At that moment, the maid knocked on the office door. She had come to tell Baron Amantha the news something had happened to the lady. The Baron bowed politely and warned the Duke that he was forced to leave first for an important reason. It seems the Baron has started having complications again. The lady is having a hard time now. Before he can even take his eyes off, something happens to this woman. The aristocrats whispered that what was the point of them finding the mine, since the Baron couldn't even inspect it, as he was constantly busy with business because of his wife. Ellie tried to remember where she had heard his name, and finally, something became clear in her memory. Baron Amantha, this aristocrat currently owns only a small mine, but in the future, a sword will be made from the mineral found there, which will enable Damien to achieve victory. Moreover, in the north, in a place teeming with bloodthirsty monsters, weapons can bring in huge profits. Ellie said confidently that she would like to go and live in the defense of Amantha, and the Duke had no idea that she would make a decision so soon. If she had decided so, he was not going to stop her, but she would have to persuade this man thoroughly. It is unlikely that the same trick would work with the Baron. This man was completely different from typical aristocrats. Even if the trick worked on the thick-headed Viscount, Baron Amantha certainly won't fall for it. It turned out that the Duke knew that Ellie had returned the Blue Hope to the Viscount, so why didn't he intervene in this performance then? Perhaps it was because her actions, which allowed him to meet the boy and expose the Viscount, had benefited him. Then the Duke was the only person in the world who could fully appreciate her value, and he was confident that this little girl could handle it. Ellie promised to demonstrate her necessity to him, and she knew that she would definitely succeed. The Duke didn't doubt her for a second. He was just curious to see how she would manage to pull off something new. Today, the children decided to explore the magnificent, fragrant garden. As the maid said, it was full of beautiful flowers. She said that if you walk along the corridor connected to the outside of the main castle, you can see a luxurious greenhouse. Several days had passed since this meeting, and the vassals still kept their mouths shut. They were probably afraid of the Duke. Ellie didn't care at all. A happy boy was running in front of her, who seemed to have seen a dandelion for the first time in his life. Damien, as if enchanted by magic, delightedly caught the light, fluffy heads of dandelions in the air. Each caught fluffy creature was a small victory, a small flap of the wings of an unknown bird of happiness. His face glowed with sincere joy, his eyes sparkled like two mischievous lights. Loudly, ringing like a bell, he called Ellie. His voice, full of childish delight, carried the impatience of a discoverer. He wanted to share something important, something that made his heart beat faster. Among the dense greenery, there was a bush with lush, bright yellow roses. Their petals, so bright and sunny, resembled the color of her own hair, a surprising resemblance, an unexpected reflection that took her breath away. Nearby, Ellie found small blue flowers that could be compared to the color of the boy's eyes. Sky blue, they resembled his sincere eyes. The flowers were incredibly beautiful. The wind ruffled his fair hair, but he seemed oblivious to anything other than this fleeting miracle. Finally, this sweet boy could smile so brightly, so sincerely, enjoying every moment. Ellie decided to tell him, he had probably already heard, that the girl was going to be adopted soon. At first, Damien was afraid that Ellie would now leave him and live in a completely different place. She was going to become the adopted daughter of Baron Amantha, and the boy was worried that they would no longer be able to see each other like before. Ellie promised that they would be there. She would just get a new name, but she would also continue to be there for him. His eyes were shining with happiness. The boy had just recently had his first fencing lesson, and soon he would begin training full-time. It turns out that today was the last day when he could rest peacefully, and it was time to play catch-up. In this game, one runs away and the other catches him, and the boy immediately imagined how joyful it would be to hug him when he caught him. The children were playing happily. They couldn't run far from the greenhouse, otherwise the maid would start to worry. The game of tag was over, but the boy still didn't let go of her hand, as if he was afraid that she might disappear at any moment. Something frightening appeared on the horizon. Could it really be the Viscount's vassals, and at a moment when they were left alone? Ellie hugged Damien tightly. The children looked at the rising shadow in fear, and could not even imagine what could happen to them next. The girl closed her eyes and Damien buried his face in her warm clothes, expecting something terrible to happen. Luckily, nothing dangerous happened. A strange woman appeared in front of them, who had just fallen to the ground. The lady was shivering from the cold. She was very scared, as if she did not understand at all where she was now. The lady asked where she was, why it was so cold outside. Fortunately, she was not the Viscount's vassal. For some reason, it was very difficult for her to get up from the ground. Ellie rushed to help the stranger. She noticed her expensive clothes, which meant that this lady was definitely not one of the castle's servants, and first suggested that she go to the greenhouse. Taking her hand, Ellie felt that the woman was very cold, but if she was left here, something bad would definitely happen to her. Dragging her by force might only frighten her, so you need to be as gentle with her as possible. Ellie happily gave her name and said that she was walking here with her friend, but that this stranger was doing here. The woman couldn't answer this question. It was strange. Had she suddenly lost her memory? It was obvious that she didn't remember anything, couldn't say her name. Maybe she really did have memory problems. During this disease, a person gradually loses all memories, just like with dementia from a past life, and this disease also worsens if the person is disturbed. Ellie had heard that there was no cure for the terrible disease, and she carefully took her cold hands. She really wanted to help her, wrapped her in a warm scarf, and told her that there was a place where beautiful flowers grew, and they could go and play there. First of all, she needed to warm up, and it was impossible to allow the lady to fall again. Ellie suggested that the boy support her from both sides. The woman quickly calmed down, and little Ellie's support was very pleasant for her. Holding hands, the children and the stranger reached a luxurious greenhouse, inside which it was very warm. Ellie asked what the lady was doing there in such cold weather. Maybe she got lost, but she herself did not know why she suddenly ended up in that place. It happened that Ellie herself often forgot something, but she felt that this woman had completely different problems. She decided to ask her name, but the woman thought deeply about this question and sighed heavily. She may not have liked it that Ellie called her grandma, but she still couldn't pronounce her own name. It turned out that she was desperately trying to remember her name, but unfortunately she couldn't do it. A familiar voice was heard very close by. The young lady immediately recognized it. The gentleman loudly called Lady Vera. It turns out that he has been looking for her for a long time. The woman immediately recognized a familiar man named Marvin. He was incredibly nervous. She got lost again, but luckily she was quickly found. Baron Amantha, the same man who had just been present at the meeting with the Duke, appeared before the children. Are they really husband and wife? Does this mean that this woman is the legal Baroness Amantha? The Baron warned her to stay with the maid, but the woman was incredibly sorry that she had made him nervous again. The gentleman thought that these children were up to something, but they certainly shouldn't use his wife's illness for their own vile purposes. It was unpleasant. The Baron thought that Ellie had gotten close to her on purpose, but at that moment the boy immediately stood up for her. The Baron became worried. It seemed the young gentleman had misunderstood him, but the boy angrily declared that he had heard everything clearly. A kind man would not speak to a young lady like that, because the gentleman just dared to be rude to her. This could turn into trouble. The boys shouldn't move away from the Baron. The mine is a mine, but there was also an outstanding knight in the past. Now he is already old and rarely takes up the sword, but thanks to his rich experience and excellent skills, he will become an excellent teacher in the future. Ellie hastened to calm her friend down, asking him to calm down, and the Baron definitely did not wish her any harm. For some reason, the gentleman was in a strange mood. He saw outstanding talents in the girl. Now it became clear to him why his lordship brought her here. He decided to warn her right away that such jokes would not work with him, and he had not the slightest desire to adopt her. Therefore, the Baron asked not to approach his wife anymore, and wanted to leave the greenhouse as soon as possible. Was it all lost, Ellie? Of course. Guessed that he didn't like it, but not to that extent. In the current situation, he could have perceived everything incorrectly, but now the young master also developed a deep dislike for him. Ellie asked the boy to listen. There is nothing good in avoiding all strangers. It happened, she said it herself, that instead of enduring, one must give a worthy rebuff. But this only applied to those situations that concerned him directly. The boy was angered by the way the Baron spoke to her, so he decided to stand up for her, but why did he do the wrong thing then? Ellie wanted to explain a lot to him, but now Demian was still too young to understand things that were too adult. Demian grew up as a child who had no idea of such concepts as anger or sadness, and although he quickly opened up to the girl, he still had a very poor understanding of his own emotions, and such a child was now angry. No wonder he resisted and fought back. So can we tell him never to do it again? Of course, she couldn't make him not experience such feelings, especially when he sees that someone is trying to offend his loved ones. To ensure that the boy would not be upset and would be confident in his abilities and words, Ellie hastened to praise him adequately. The fact that he showed emotion already means that he made a big step forward and deserves praise. Just one kind word made the boy smile again, and a second later he felt no anger at all. Ellie had no intention of stopping his heart's will. He just needed to interact with strangers and would quickly learn about a wide variety of emotions. She only warned him that if in the future he got angry again and wanted to stand up for someone, he would have to stop, and she promised not to get into such situations. Even if she finds herself in a dangerous situation, she will definitely be able to get out on her own. The boy listened to her words with interest, because he could truly trust only this girl. At this moment, someone called loudly to the young master and young lady. It was the excited maid. Ivana ran through the greenhouse, and it would be bad if the Baron had already conveyed that he had refused to adopt the thief's daughter. Ivana asked if they had seen Baron Amantha by chance, and if they had not just run into him and the Baroness. The maid, becoming agitated, warned them that the next time they saw the Baroness, it would be better to avoid her. The Baroness has an illness that causes her to gradually lose her memory. When she loses it completely, she will become like a predictable child. It is unclear why she contracted the rare disease, but it turns out that Amantha's family has a son. This strange young man's name is Mr. Jarrett, and they say the Baroness's condition began to worsen after he gave birth. Nobody knew about the cure. The maid knew absolutely nothing about it. Anyway, when she met her again, the lady asked to call the adults, but little Ellie still didn't understand something. Considering that she was suffering from an incurable disease, her condition was not that bad. She even called the Baron by name as soon as she saw him. Her condition is really hard to control, but is it worth leaving the patient alone? Fearing for his wife's well-being, the Baron, not without reason, introduced a bunch of maids to her, but even after that she began to disappear. He understood that at such moments the lady became out of sorts and completely didn't understand what she was doing. For many years the Baron had no idea how to combat her illness, but it seemed as if she was getting worse with each passing year. When Vera became pregnant, he was over the moon, and they were the most wonderful family then. After all, he waited patiently for them to have their first child, but immediately after the birth, his wife's condition began to deteriorate sharply. Even imperial medicine proved powerless in the face of this disease, and over time the frequency of incidents increased. One day the Baron couldn't stand it, he yelled at her, and that same night she was found not far from the castle, asleep on a cliff. It was the most terrible day of his life. On that fateful day when they quarreled, she could have died. Perhaps Vera is losing her memory for a reason, because she wants to forget everything, even if she tries to be careful. If you think about it, only the Baron wanted a child from the very beginning, and perhaps by doing so he unknowingly tied down his wife, who loved freedom so much. It would be scary if this was the reason for her memory loss, but no matter how hard the Baron tried to solve this mystery, he could not find the answers. Unexpectedly, the lady told him that she had survived today only thanks to the girl with whom he had seen her. That sweet young lady with golden hair. It was she who warmed her hands and gave her her scarf, and also walked her to the greenhouse. Such a kind girl, like a little angel, and if it weren't for her, the woman would still be shaking on the street from the terrible cold. The Baron had not seen his wife like this for a long time. She laughed loudly, but in recent years she had been very depressed. She carefully took her husband by the hand and suggested that they go together tomorrow to those children and apologize, because that girl had become a savior for her. The Baron was very afraid that this girl's actions were just another performance, with the help of which she was trying to attract attention. He knew Ellie needed a new family, but after his wife's sincere smile, he was ready to do anything. Unfortunately, he was rude to the young lady, stating that he had no desire to adopt a commoner. Remembering the childish, naive eyes, for some reason the Baron now felt so heavy in his soul from his own words. In that situation, he could have simply remained silent, but what if the girl did it out of good intentions? Perhaps he was simply afraid that someone would dare to offend his wife and take advantage of her painful weakness. The children spent time together all the time, and every day Ellie admired the boy more and more. After the warm bath, his skin was so soft that she couldn't stop pinching his cheeks. How can his skin even be so incredibly soft, like it's made of cotton candy? Ellie decided to prove that his chubby cheeks were much softer than hers, and took his hand, placing it on her cheek. The boy was so confused that he almost fainted, and his cheeks turned bright red from embarrassment. He almost lost consciousness, because he had just touched the most tender cheeks in his life. Ellie was upset. Were her cheeks really so bad that he didn't even know how to talk about it? Naturally, she ate poorly and didn't take care of herself at all. Loina quietly entered the room and warned them that Baron and Baroness Amantha had arrived. The guys certainly didn't expect to see them here, especially since no one had warned them about the visit in advance. The Baron apologized, but at the time he didn't understand the situation and misunderstood everything, so he came personally to ask for forgiveness. Ellie was already scared that he had come to sort things out again, but now she didn't even know how to react correctly. The Baron hadn't immediately realized the full usefulness of the mineral he had found, and it seemed that now she understood why this had happened. All this time he was so worried about his wife that he did not devote any time to other matters. This means that if you create conditions in which he can concentrate on work, the sword for the boy will be made much faster. The Baron came to offer a sincere apology, and Ellie decided to ask him for something in return. People with memory loss are very easily stunned and very afraid if you raise your voice at them, so she had a little idea. The Baron was surprised how this little girl already knew so much about his wife's illness, since they had met only recently. With a radiant smile, the little girl asked her to never scold her mistress again, and she was sure that this would help her cope with the illness a little. Her request was very kind. Ellie asked the lady to walk with her, and to do this as often as possible. Ellie had only been living here for a short time, and she had no friends except for the boy, but even he would soon begin learning fencing. So soon they will spend even less time together, and she would really like to make another friend. She invited the lady to go for a walk together 3 times a week and promised not to bother her with stupid questions. The lady was afraid that this might become a burden for the young lady, but if the mistress did not mind, Ellie would only be glad of it. They will be able to go to the greenhouse together. There are so many flowers there that she would like to show her. After these words, the Baroness's face changed, and she did not expect that the little girl's request would be so sweet. It was a great honor for her to spend more time with young Mrs. Ellie, a kind and sweet girl. They decided to drink some delicious tea. Ellie told them how she got to the castle. The Baroness asked if the decision to go north had probably not been easy. Until now, the girl could not get used to the fact that adults addressed her as you, but compared to the orphanage, this was simply paradise. It was 1,000 times better than being oppressed, and soon she would have her own capital, so things were going just fine for her. The Baroness was worried the girl's life in the cold shelter was simply terrible, and it must have been very difficult for her. For a moment, Ellie remembered how she lived before this, but she never gave up. On the one hand, it wasn't that hard for her. The children at the orphanage were very kind and friendly, and she made friends there. Although of course not all of them, the worst were the teachers. But the Duke, who usually does not care about other people's affairs, solved all the problems. It was he who saved the boy from the orphanage, and the young lady did not hesitate to tell the Baroness the whole truth. The lady assumed that it was most likely due to a feeling of guilt. She was a little worried whether it was worth saying such a thing. But if not her, then who will tell the young lady about everything that happened before this? She decided to tell while she still remembered all the details. About 15 years ago, the Empire unleashed a massive battle. This was done due to a single prediction from the Great Temple. Only a non-existent force could raise the Empire again. This power usually denoted the amazing vital energy emanating from the World Tree. In the process of studying it, people realized that magic arises from nature, and therefore, the closer the soul is to the World Tree, the more powerful magic it is endowed with. And the proof of this was the people who lived right next to him and used very unusual magic. But one day the tree suddenly dried up, and no matter how much the people tried to bring it back to life, it never bloomed. They said that those living near the World Tree did not try to revive it, but on the contrary, hid it from everyone in order to possess its power themselves. Therefore, in order to protect the Empire, the Imperial Court, together with the Great Temple, declared battle. Duke Clyder and Duke Schutz also took part in them, and the two became friends on the battlefield. It was they who led the Empire to victory, taking control of the rest of that people. The people solemnly greeted the dukes, who from that moment on became a symbol of victory for them. Then all the aristocrats came out to meet the Duke with joyful souls, but that was not the end. On that happy day, the Duke did not return alone. Next to him was an attractive, sweet girl. He held her tightly in his arms, and then the gentleman returned home with the now-deceased Mrs. Uriah. Ellie was surprised there wasn't a single word about the Duke's wife in the book. She was sure he had been single all his life. The Baroness said that this girl was one of the representatives of that family, and immediately became his wife. People with the last name Schutz were said to be unusual and to have inherited the blood of the devil. From generation to generation, madness continues to haunt them. As far as was known, many of them lost their minds due to an ancient curse. That's why people call the Schuetz family a cursed family, but the whole story revolved around the boy, and Ellie didn't even know about it. Most likely, the Duke intervened at that time to calm his madness, but after the appearance of Lady Yuri, there was no trace of his affliction left. The Baroness had heard that people here could use a wide variety of magic, so it could well have been due to her power. In the end, the Duke and the lady got engaged, and as Ellie thought, the gentleman was not so calm. There was a lot of fuss on the wedding day, but these people still fell deeply in love with each other, truly. That girl was the only one who could save him from madness, so he took her with him, even though she belonged to a different people. However, there was one more thing: using unique magic came with a special price. 3 years later, when the Duke went to suppress the rebellion, the lady decided to use her magic to completely free the Duke from the curse. After that event, the gentleman broke off diplomatic relations with everyone. 2 more years passed, and in another letter from Clyder it was said that he had a son. Then Duke Schuetz opened the locked gates of his castle for the first time in a long time, on the very day their carriage fell off the cliff. Now Ellie understood why the Duke felt guilty towards the boy, and blamed only himself for the loss of his wife and the loss of his friend. How could she understand him? Because she was the only one who had lost someone dear and beloved to her. It was as if a storm cloud hung over Ellie. The lady began to worry. Perhaps she told the whole story at once. Ellie simply felt sorry for the gentleman, by the way. When the Baroness sat like this with the girl, she remembered her son. It is unlikely that he will be able to become a friend to a little girl. This man is already quite grown up. But what's interesting is that the son is particularly interested in the affairs of the family mine, and for Ellie this could be very profitable. Now is the perfect time to ask the Baroness for one small favor that will be useful to everyone. Ellie happily asked if they could visit the mine, and she desperately wanted to go there. The family mine was located in a remote area from the town, surrounded by sand dunes. For a long time, Baron Amanth's son, Jareth, had been trying to figure out how to improve the magical sword made of blue stone. If things go on like this, he won't be able to please his mother, and his father has never acknowledged him. Jareth wanted to be useful so that the master would not be disappointed in him, but he only sighed endlessly, looking at the mysterious product. Today, the Baron decided to sit in his own mine for no reason, and his son was very surprised when he saw him. Father rarely visited this place. Jerry was worried. He does not come because he does not believe in his powers at all. The father asked if he had managed to find out anything about the magic sword, but unfortunately, his son had no news. Suddenly, the father suggested that perhaps there was no need to rush so much, and that it would be better for his son to rest a little and think about something else. Jarrett promised to try his best not to disappoint his father, so he need not worry. The information will be found soon. The father understood that the young man was free to do as he wished, but suddenly a child's voice was heard behind him. The Baron didn't even notice he swung his hand sharply and accidentally hit the forehead of a little girl standing nearby. It was young Mrs. Ellie. She came here with his wife, but what is she doing here? The Baron stood there with his mouth open, completely perplexed as to why his wife had brought this girl here. The lady said again that her husband might be dissatisfied, but she and little Ellie really wanted to come here today. The Baron was worried. There were so many dangerous things here, and they definitely shouldn't have come here. Ellie immediately noticed the blue sword, ran up to the table and asked if it was really a dangerous weapon. The sword was carved from a magical stone. It shone incredibly in the sun, and the girl immediately wanted to touch it. She looked at Jarrett with sincere eyes, hoping that he would turn out to be a good and kind person. He knew that this was the girl whom the Duke had brought with him as the future Duke's bride, but he warned that this item was too dangerous. Ellie apologized for her persistence, was a little sad, but understood that it was a weapon and it really could be dangerous. To keep the little girl from getting upset, the young man offered to show her something else that would not threaten her life. The Baron wanted to warn the girl and intervene in the conversation, but at that moment his wife stopped him. She looked into his eyes with special trust, making it clear that nothing terrible would happen there without his knowledge, and that his son was already quite grown up. Jareth handed the young lady a magical monocle created using a magical mana stone. This simple device needs to be placed on one eye and the other closed. To prevent Ellie from getting dizzy, the young man took her hands, and the girl responsibly followed his instructions, squinting one eye. Surprisingly, they quickly found a common language, and the Baroness was touched, so this is what it would be like to have a little daughter. The Baron couldn't even imagine that his wife would ever want to have a daughter, because before she didn't want to have children at all. The family mined magical mana stones, and their dazzling shine quickly attracted the young lady. The huge box contained stones that had been recently mined and already processed, but Jarrett warned that they should not be touched under any circumstances. This time they found a very unusual genus. Once it comes into contact with the body, it is simply impossible to tear it off. It becomes very hard and begins to secrete strange substances. Ellie staggered. These stones looked like real monsters. The young man asked if she had seen them somewhere before. She said that Demian had to meet these people before he arrived here. It was very scary. He said that if they grabbed hold, they would not let go. At the same time, the boy was having his first fencing lessons, and suddenly he felt as if Ellie was calling him right now. Jareth burst out laughing. Indeed, they could be compared to monsters. If they grabbed him, they would definitely not let go. The words made him think seriously. He had been looking for an answer to one troubling question for a long time, and now it seemed to him as if he had already seen it somewhere. One day, while patrolling one of the cities, the commander asked me to check if there were any more monsters left around, so that I could safely return to the castle. At that time, the young man was still a young boy, and suddenly in a pile of stones he noticed special stones shining in the sun. It was strange that precious ore could come from such a place, so he decided to take it and show it to the Baron himself. Just as he was about to touch the stone, another knight shouted at him not to touch it, as he was looking at a rare kind of monster. It was a beautiful and shining stone in appearance, but if you touched it, you would never be able to get rid of it. It was a beautiful stone on the outside, almost ordinary in appearance, but in reality it was just waiting for an opportunity to cling to this human flesh, and it was a real monster. Neither the Baron nor his son could even imagine that an ordinary magic stone could turn out to be a bloodthirsty creature. It seems that this young man finally realized that this mine is not just a place, but a real lair of monsters. And now, using their power, they will be able to create a brilliant weapon. With short-term contact with the skin, the effect of the monster's poison will be insignificant, but if it is held long enough, the poison will have time to penetrate the entire body and lead to inevitable death. Yes, to think of creating weapons from real monsters, which was expected from the Duke's vassals, but it seems that this happened 3 years ahead of schedule. The Baroness invited the little girl to go back, and she had already talked enough with the Baron. The lady smiled sweetly, admitting that this little girl had already done so much for her son, husband, and also for her. They decided to go back before it got dark, so that the Duke wouldn't worry. After Ellie's words, Jarrett realized something. They were talking animatedly with their father, and the lady had not seen them so happy for a long time. The Duke was informed that the young lady and Baroness Amantha had agreed to meet 3 times a week. So, instead of the Baron, she decided to get closer to the lady, a rather smart child. Now the Baron will be able to concentrate on his work. By the way, the butler reported that just recently Baron Amantha sent something personally for the Duke. In the box, on black velvet, lay an elegantly forged arrow with a dark blue tip. Recently, the Baron told me that he had made something unusual, an arrow from a recently discovered ore that he and his son had been puzzling over for a long time. In fact, the mineral that the Baron found turned out to be a real monster, and it was from it that this weapon was made, and it is simply amazing. The Duke thought the Baron would be distracted because of his wife, but this time he did a great job. This is only the beginning, and soon he will figure out the sword. It seemed that even the butler type who spent the night understood why the gentleman took the young lady Ellie with him. He said that this discovery was made only thanks to her, and when she decided to visit the family mine. Although she mentioned it in passing, it was precisely because of her words that it became clear that it was not ore that had found the defense. The girl turned out to be very smart, but in fact the Duke took her with him because he suspected her of having an affair with the Emperor himself. Despite her age, she is already quite smart and has an unwavering will, which means there is a high probability that the imperial family will use her to subjugate Damian. And the death of his best friend, Mr. Clater, on that fateful night was certainly no accident. Therefore, the Duke thought that this child could accidentally reveal information about the Emperor and thereby help him analyze all the circumstances. That was his plan, but for some reason the mere thought of this little child being connected to the Emperor put him in a bad mood. Suddenly, someone knocked on the office door. The butler with a dagger in his hands went to check who was there, in case the Duke was in danger. The man certainly did not expect to see a young lady who suddenly came to visit the gentleman at such a late hour. Ellie greeted her politely. As usual, she looked incredibly sweet and very kind. She said that she simply came to visit the Duke and wanted to tell him something. To be honest, she came here to eavesdrop on how the developments were going, and in general, it seemed to her from the beginning that the butler was a calm person. But just a little more, and he would have definitely swung his dagger, which he had cleverly managed to hide behind his back. Ellie came here with a small excuse. She decided to bring the Duke a special headache medicine. The head maid recently told me that the gentleman constantly had headaches, and she decided to try to help him. The butler was touched by what a kind soul this girl was, and asked where she managed to get this medicine. A little earlier, the head maid gave her a headache remedy, and Ellie suspected that there was something behind the butler's back, but fortunately, he abruptly threw away the dagger. He deftly threw it away so as not to frighten her lady, and she had to accept that she had simply imagined it. The Duke asked in surprise why she had decided to take on extra trouble, and whether she was simply very worried. Ellie looked like a small, harmless rabbit with fluffy ears and huge, sincere eyes. The butler asked the young lady to give him this medicine too, because he also sometimes had severe headaches. Ellie carefully handed the gentleman a paper bag with medicine, but in reality, he just wanted to make sure there was nothing dangerous in it. The Duke trusted this girl, so there was no reason to check anything, and asked her to give him the medicine immediately. The butler didn't even have time to understand anything. The gentleman quickly snatched the small paper bag from his hands. Although he knew perfectly well that he, the master, had never felt dizzy in his life, and he was unlikely to need this medicine. The Duke saw through it right away. Ask her why she brought it. She didn't come here just to give you the headache remedy, and you definitely can't fool this man. She just wanted to say hello, but since that's the case, she'll have to tell him that last time the Duke warned her that she could choose the adoption home she wanted. Ellie came to re-elect him. This is her final decision, which she really wanted to change. She was doing so well, but why did she decide to give up everything, and would the master really be against it? Okay, she probably had her reasons for changing her mind. He asked where she wanted to go, and the young lady confidently answered, to the Duke's house. She didn't intend to stay here for long. As soon as the time came, she would leave on her own, but for now the Duke would simply have to accept her. The gentleman asked not to say stupid things. He didn't like anything touching, and especially he didn't plan to have children. Disqualification without warning. Ellie left the office. The butler became worried. The young lady was still very young, and asked the gentleman to be a little more delicate with her. It was just children's medicine, no wonder. The young lady was still just a child. The Duke laughed. She wanted to relieve his pain from the curse with a regular medicine, and one intended for children at that. After that, I started thinking that this girl could very well be a spy for the Emperor himself. He was ready to believe it, but for some reason, again and again, after each meeting, he began to desperately worry about her. Of course, Ellie assumed that the Duke had rejected her too, and that evening he asked her not to say such nonsense anymore. But she didn't expect him to do it so decisively. Everything was not at all as she imagined. If she had become his daughter and not his daughter-in-law, it would have been possible not to get divorced, but simply to calmly leave her adoptive parent. Perhaps the Duke simply doesn't want to take in the thief's daughter, as this would certainly affect the high status of the ducal family. There are only 4 years left before Damien goes into his first terrible battle. And in another 5 years, she will meet the main character, her beloved chosen one, which means Ellie still had 9 whole years left. This is quite enough to carry out your brilliant plan. You just need to take good care of your life until the moment the main character appears. The Baron decided to help the young master with his training, and at first the Baroness didn't even believe it, and asked her husband several times. It seemed that the hint about the oar had been a great help to the Baron, but there was only one thing that bothered him. The boy was still angry with him, and if he refused the Baron's help, it would be of no use. Ellie knew the outcome of all the events very well, and now it was impossible to allow this to happen. Everything had to be foreseen in advance. They went out to the training ground, but for some reason the young master was sitting on the floor in front of the other knights, and did something happen. Ellie ran up to him and asked excitedly what had happened, in case he had already managed to get hurt. His cheeks were red, the boy was all wet. Suddenly he needed to see a doctor, but he assured that he was not hurt. He was just a little out of breath and sat down to rest. He had scared the young lady beyond belief, and judging by the other knights' faces, his training was not at all for the lungs. Ellie had completely forgotten that this boy wielded a sword even better than the most experienced knights. Questions arise about how hard the training was since all the adult knights stood in sweat with trembling hands. Even though Damien might become a swordmaster in the future, he was still a child, so they could have handled him more gently. Ellie promised to come to training more often in the future, to keep an eye out for any of the knights trying to simply torment the boy. But everything was really fine with him. None of the knights in training tried to make fun of him. On the other hand, he really wanted Ellie to come more often. It was hard for him here, but in reality it was hardest for the adult knights. If she was nearby, the boy knew that he would definitely not get tired, so he would be very glad to see her here. There was something about his expression that was all too familiar, like that of a little Tommy who was always trying to hide something. She believed that Damien would definitely not lie to her, and promised that from now on she would regularly come to training. They were so sweet that neither the lady nor the grown-up boys could hide their emotions of admiration. The training continued, and a venerable baron appeared on the site and greeted the young gentleman. His wife was there too, along with their little girl, eagerly awaiting the start of the important training session. The baron didn't know they were there, but Ellie had heard he'd agreed to lead the training, so she came to thank him. This certainly shouldn't be a problem, the baron agreed, and besides, he had already received much more help from this little girl. For this reason, he wanted to give her something later, but since she was already here, now was the best time. The baron presented the young lady with a magical bow made from stones mined in the family mine. It was his special gift, and the girl was even surprised whether he really decided to give it to her. There was even a little mana in this thing, and it seemed that her hint helped him much more than she thought. The gift was truly precious. Swords are most often used in battle, but with his current skills, the master was unable to recreate it yet. This means that the baron has not yet achieved mastery in making swords. But was her hint really of no use at all? The baron told of a man who would soon be able to make the honored sword, a gentleman named Wayberk. The blacksmith who works in his castle would not be an exaggeration to say that it was he who created all the swords for the knights here. Ellie wondered if he could ask him to make a decent sword in that case, but there was a small problem. Quite recently, the blacksmith went blind in one eye, and the doctor said that his other eye might soon lose its sight as well, and no one could cure it. There may be another doctor who can handle this problem if only he takes the treatment responsibly, but there is another problem. The blacksmith himself refused to be treated, and Ellie now looked as if she was trying to find out information. If she continued asking questions, the baron would think that she was trying to find out something, and that he should stop and find out everything later from someone else. So she decided not to ask any more questions, and confessed that her mother had once told her that she shouldn't poke her nose too much into other people's business. And the baron was unlikely to tell her all the details, and in these words, she was absolutely right. Then the right time had finally come to start training, only Ellie asked the baron to be a little gentler with the boy. He was still too young. It would be necessary to quickly find out about this Wayberk. Ellie wanted to step aside, but suddenly the young gentleman grabbed her by the sleeve of her dress. He said sadly that he didn't like this man, and last time he dared to be rude to Ellie. It was good that the baron didn't hear his words. The boy simply didn't yet know that the baron was a completely different person and shouldn't be judged by his past actions. Although it looks like a grandfather, he is very strong, but the boy still could not forgive him for his past rudeness. In his opinion, he was a bad person. Then he said that Ellie was bad and just left, but it's as if he doesn't see that this is not true at all. The boy suddenly burst into tears. He felt hurt and offended that some person out of nowhere dared to offend his best friend. Ellie tried to calm him down. She admitted that she was completely fine, and the main thing was that he trusted her, and that was already quite enough. Kind words quickly calmed Damien down, especially when Ellie tried to support him. That's why the girl asked. She just wants him to trust the baron as much as he trusts her. Damien looked at her with sincere voices, trying to believe that this person could be of great help to him in training. The young gentleman was a very smart boy. Ellie hugged her best friend caringly, calling him a real fellow. Now she thought about an important point in the book's plot. Everything happened a little differently. In the original, Damien didn't have to suffer like this here, which means it was all her fault or a big mistake. Then wasn't it enough that people here hated only her? Because the boy had nothing to do with it. And now there was only one way left. It is necessary for the young master to become much stronger, and if he is recognized by the Duke's people, he will be treated differently, and the others will not be able to show unexpected hostility towards him when he finally believes in his own strength. The baron immediately noticed that the boy was an excellent swordsman and possessed unparalleled skills, almost like those of the most talented knights. He watched the young Damien, whose movements were honed to perfection, and each blow of his sword carried a power beyond his years. There was a fire burning in his heart, a desire to surpass himself, to become worthy of what he had always craved, power. Power that would allow him not only to protect himself, but also Ellie. The butler appeared on the training ground and politely greeted the lady and the little girl. He also came to training. Today was the young master's first lesson, and how could he miss such a grand event? Although it seems he worried in vain, the boy coped even better than expected, and the Baron took his training seriously from the very first minutes. Ellie happily told him that the Baron had given her a bow made from a new, recently discovered ore, and yet she had managed to interest this man, and everyone should notice that. They watched the training closely. The young gentleman quickly took the initiative, but his reaction was a little sluggish. By the way, the butler was hiding something behind his back again, and the fact that he was trying to hide it made the girls even more interested. It wasn't just diligence, it was a gift, a hidden potential that the Baron couldn't help but notice, while Damien, absorbed in his training, saw and heard nothing. At some point the training stopped. The boy needed to rest because he was giving it his all. Ellie wanted to intervene, go up to him and calm him down, but the next second she stopped. The butler asked if she was going to approach him, but Ellie felt that now was not the best time for her, although she really wanted to do so. Unfortunately, she couldn't intervene every time. The wind, in order for Damien to be able to proudly carry the name of his family, he must learn to cope with his emotions himself. The Baron wanted to adjust to his rhythm, but in the end, without noticing, he suddenly lost his composure. On the one hand, this guy's fencing was just terrible right now, but what's surprising is that he easily reads the flow of the fight and adapts perfectly to unforeseen situations. Even knights who have spent a long time on the battlefield cannot always boast of such abilities, so where did such abilities come from in a young boy? He didn't know the classic techniques, didn't study tactical formations, but his movements showed intuitive wisdom every time the enemy lunged. Damien seemed to anticipate his next move. His body moved with a surprising natural grace, as if it already knew what it was supposed to do, even if his mind hadn't yet had time to process the information. The Baron understood that it seemed that before his arrival, he had already conducted training sessions with the knights and had managed to learn something. Judging by the knights' faces, these sparring sessions turned out to be much more difficult than they expected, even though there was only a small boy in front of them. After this child decided to fight with the Baron, who heard that before, when he was a servant, he had to fight with real monsters. He seemed to be dancing on the brink of danger, and his opponent partner was leading the games, which Damien masterfully rearranged in his own unique way. But suddenly, the young gentleman dropped his sword and fell. The Baron looked him in the eyes and confidently said, "The boy must get up because the training is not over yet." He realized the main thing, it turns out, that his excellent abilities are the result of past experience in battles with bloodthirsty creatures. There are two types of swordsmanship, defensive and offensive. The young master was an excellent attacker, but right now his sword was not able to protect anyone. Perhaps it was a heightened sense of distance, or the ability to detect the slightest vibrations in an opponent's body, invisible signals that experienced fighters carefully concealed. A burning desire to win seemed to give his arms inhuman strength, but his body's strength was not limitless. At the most crucial moment, when the wooden blade began its deadly journey, something broke. The muscles, tense to the limit, suddenly weakened. The sword, which just a second ago seemed like an extension of his will, became an unbearable weight. The Baron decided that training was over for the day and asked the boy to get some rest. As soon as he showed his opponent his weak spot, there was no longer any chance of winning. Damien was very upset, but the Baron warned him that they would meet again for sparring when the young master had a good rest. Still too young, he could not resist the rolling wave of fatigue. His body, which had not yet had time to strengthen, demanded rest, suppressing the will to continue. His sword lay on the ground, a silent witness to his youthful determination and strength. Today did not bring him the long-awaited victory, but it taught him something: more limits, and the need to listen to his own body. It seemed that the Baron now understood perfectly well why the Duke had brought with him the girl for whom he had tried so desperately to win. The boy was dejected, and for the first time in a long time, Ellie had seen him so seriously annoyed. The most important thing is that he doesn't hate the Baron for such a small first loss. Tomorrow will be a new day, and perhaps then he will be able to finish what he started. Damien promised that very soon he will become the strongest. It turned out that Ellie shouldn't have worried so much. The boy now had an adult goal, and this was definitely a good change. He was already strong enough for her, but he wanted to become stronger to protect those dear to him, but he didn't fully believe in himself yet. In the original, he only said this line after the main character appeared, and she was worried why he said it now. Ellie warned him that he just needed to eat properly, and if he ate well, he could even put up a fight on his own. She carefully wiped away his childish tears with a handkerchief and promised that very soon he would become the strongest boy. The maid announced that the table was already set, and the children happily ran to eat delicious food to become stronger. In the north, winter comes very quickly. The forest is already covered with snow, but the children still really enjoyed walking together. Demian exhaled warm air, and in the cold it turned into a magical cloud of steam. The boy imitated Ellie's actions with interest. It was incredibly cute, and I wondered who he had grown up to be, such a cutie. Having turned onto the path, the children decided to go along it, but the maid warned them that this road could be dangerous, and it would be better to go in a different direction. The maid Aisel covered her nose with a handkerchief. It was strange why she did this, since Ellie didn't notice the strange smell at first. The maid apologized. There was just a terrible smell nearby. She has a very keen sense of smell. The girl was already starting to worry. Was there really a bad smell coming from her? And it was definitely not from the boy. He always smells delicious. Ellie was almost in tears. The maid hastened to calm her down. They both only smelled of flowers, and they had nothing to do with it. Aisel decided to show the children something, and politely asked them to follow her into the thicket of the forest. In front of them lay a beautiful red lake. Something like this only existed on this earth. Many people, intrigued by its unusual color, approached it and ended up drowning. She brought the children here only to tell them about the danger of this place because of the annual incidents. They even thought about filling the lake up. But this turned out to be impossible due to the mana located underneath it, so children are not allowed to approach it under any circumstances from now on. This concerned not only the young master, but also Ellie. Even though she was older than him, neither of them should go near this place. At the edge of the forest he appeared, a strange man, shrouded in an aura of sinister mystery, as if he had stepped from the pages of old legends. Crows circled around his head, their black wings rustling in the air. Their presence seemed to be a part of him, an integral part of his sinister appearance. A black beard, thick and unkempt, hid the lower part of his face, giving him the appearance of a stern hermit, and a patch over one eye added to the mystery, leaving the other eye, the only one visible, hidden in shadow. This man was unlike anyone they had seen before. His appearance was terrifying, inexplicable, and piercing. It seemed as if the shadow itself had come for them. Suddenly, the man took a bottle of alcohol out of his pocket and started drinking it as if it were a delicious fruit juice. The smell of alcohol and something sour wafted nearby, and the maid politely greeted the man, asking if he remembered her. In the first seconds, he caused real fear in the children, but obviously this meeting did not foreshadow anything terrible. Looking at the little children, he warned that he had said more than once that bringing children here was very dangerous. The maid knew this very well. The next second her head started spinning, probably from the strong smell of alcohol. Now Ellie understood that she was having a hard time because of the smell emanating from this man. Aisel asked for forgiveness and decided to leave. What's strange is that she called him Mr. Weberk, the same blacksmith who would create a sword for the young master in the future. Aisel barely survived from the unpleasant smell. She was pale. The girl asked if it was true that the man made all the weapons for the castle, as the Baron said. It was true, but it was in the distant past, and was it because now one of his eyes was completely blind? It turned out that this was not the case at all. One day, a tragedy happened. His daughter drowned in this red lake. It's an old story. Everyone in the castle knows about it. Now it's no wonder why the men smelled so strongly of alcohol. Not only did he lose his daughter, but he also went blind, but he only became what he is now after the death of Mrs. Yuria, and before that he was a completely different person. The maid said that she arrived at the castle just when he had lost his daughter and was greatly insulted, and it was thanks to the communication of his mistress that he was able to get out of his terrible state. When Mrs. Yuri died, he began drinking every day, and since then, according to the doctor, he has constantly refused treatment. Now the children knew that they should not go to the Red Lake under any circumstances, and the maid hoped that they understood everything. Maybe it was because Ellie suddenly remembered her mother, but she couldn't stop thinking about this meeting. It was time to go to bed. The children snuggled up in a warm bed, and the boy was supposed to get a good rest. And since the young lady was constantly thinking about this meeting, she decided that it was worth visiting this man tomorrow, and the promise not to go there could be postponed for a while. Yesterday, Ellie spent the whole day in the cold, and now her nose was really itchy and ticklish. By the way, she couldn't even imagine that they would call a doctor because of some sneeze, although she insisted that she just sneezed. Approaching the blacksmith's hut, she saw the same doctor from the castle, probably the one who constantly comes to treat Mr. Weberk. It was just great. She just decided to ask him, but suddenly heard a terrible diagnosis. It turns out that Weberk will soon completely lose his sight, and no treatment will help him. Winter is gradually getting worse, but the man thinks it's just a temporary side effect of the medication. The doctor spoke with a gentleman through a magic ball who wanted to get rid of the forge so that he would not create a sword with the ability to absorb the Duke's aura. The whole thing was that some clan decided to take over all the weapon supplies, and the doctor was sure that the Duke would no longer be able to do it alone. The men discussed how the Duke was worth nothing without a blacksmith, and they needed to make sure the ore never fell into his hands. If the case went well, the doctor was promised the right to trade swords. Ellie could not even imagine that at the most opportune moment, she would learn terrible information. Could it be that the Duke's close associates turned out to be evil people who are doing terrible things behind his back right now? Weberk woke up with a headache as usual, but for some reason the crows were especially noisy today. He decided to go out and see if there was anyone outside, and he certainly didn't expect to see a little girl near the Red Lake. Ellie was sitting right next to the water, the same child whom he had told just yesterday to never show up here again. Frightened, the man ran up to the girl, grabbed her hand and asked what she was doing there. She knows how dangerous this lake is, and has she really completely lost her fear and wants to die unexpectedly? The girl smiled and greeted her uncle, but this was part of her grand plan. The man himself did not notice how he raised his voice, asking if she had really decided to die, but people were already afraid of him. Suddenly, this little girl would definitely burst into tears, but fortunately she was happy, and in her hands she was holding a strange arrow. It was not without reason that Ellie took it with her, showed it to the man and told him that she had recently received it as a gift from the Baron. She had never shot a bow before, so she came to this deserted place to practice. She knew the arrow must interest him. He couldn't take his eyes off her, but he wasn't so shameless as to take something from a small child. Indeed, Baron Amantha would probably be very upset if she decided to give this arrow to someone else. In this case, she decided to simply borrow it for a while, and once the gentleman had admired it enough, he could return it at any time. The arrow immediately caught the man's attention. Its tip was dark blue, and it interested him because it was made of ore. The mission to draw attention to the new weapon was successfully accomplished, and Ellie was incredibly proud of herself. It was too cold outside. The gentleman suggested going into the hut to warm up a little near the fireplace. Unfortunately, he forgot that he was in a real mess, and the smell of alcohol was too strong for a small child. He asked Ellie to sit down somewhere, and he himself decided to clean because of a girl he doesn't even know. The family the Duke had previously disregarded now had their sights set on him, and this man's misfortune was their great opportunity. If these people are now intending to completely blind Weberk, then perhaps his first eye has also stopped seeing from them, and then we cannot allow his vision to deteriorate further. In the summer, her attention was drawn to a strange bottle, which possibly contained that very dangerous medicine. The color of the medicine was somehow strange. It was too suspicious, and Ellie decided to take it to sort it out. To prevent Weberk from noticing anything, she decided to distract his attention and began to shiver as if it was very cold in the hut. Small children are always a lot of trouble, and a man has long forgotten what it's like to have a small child. Weberk quickly lit the fireplace. The hut became very warm, and Ellie could finally figure something out for herself. She wondered if he was eating well, but the man had nothing. It felt like he lived only on alcohol. Ellie said, "They say that when you have eaten well and tasty, you will be able to live through tomorrow and meet the next day in a good mood. And how long has it been since the gentleman heard this?" He said that he had a little daughter who was a very beautiful, smart, and intelligent girl. She is no longer in this world. She drowned in this red lake in front of which the young Larry sat, and he was sure that it was all his fault. Every day after her death he saw himself, that he should have told her not to go there alone, that he should have been stricter with her, but in the end he could do nothing. The situation was familiar to Ellie. He felt guilty. She told her story. Her mother died from it, of course. She did not do the right things, and she should not be justified. If it weren't for the daughter she had to raise, she wouldn't have chosen the path she had chosen. And besides, if her mother had found out that she thought the same way, she certainly wouldn't have blamed her for anything. Ellie's mother would never blame her beloved daughter, and so if his daughter looks at them now, she will think exactly the same. For a moment, the gentleman imagined that his beloved daughter was sitting next to him and saying, "Dad, you are not guilty of anything. There is no need to torment your soul." Ellie was sure the girl would say the same thing. She definitely wouldn't want her father to feel such torment. The words made the man think for so long when he found solace only in alcohol and blaming himself, but as if he had a chance. A few years ago, a good man came into his life who spoke exactly like this little girl. Unfortunately, this person is no longer in this world, but Weberk noticed a strange resemblance. The lady was very similar. After such a warm conversation, Ellie decided to go home. She lent him an arrow, and in return asked him to play with her and her friends tomorrow. Surprisingly, she asked him to come and visit his lordship's castle. The blacksmith certainly didn't expect anything like that. The little girl's brilliant plan was executed perfectly. She quickly left before the blacksmith could change his mind about refusing her. Who would have thought that such a girl lived in the castle? It looked like a long night was in store for Weberk today, and he had a mysterious arrow in his hands that he wanted to learn as much as possible about. He examined the arrow until the very morning. Even just the inspection took a lot of time. He wondered if it would be interesting to see the rod from which this amazing blue tip was made. But the man was worried about who would trust a blacksmith who hadn't even held a hammer in his hands for 10 years. Today, he went to the castle and the Duke. He hadn't been next for a long time. He was sure that if he caught the master's eye now, trouble would happen. Perhaps he smelled strongly of alcohol, and when he approached the gates, the knights of the castle stopped him, asking what he was doing there. Seeing the arrow in the stranger's hand, the knights menacingly asked him to immediately state his name, fearing that he might threaten. Weberk used to be a frequent visitor to the ducal palace, but too much time has passed since then. Surely no one in the castle would recognize him now. His hair has grown too long, and his face is covered with a thick beard. Suddenly he heard a female voice. The lady said, "It's normal that no one recognizes him here, because he has been absent here for so long." The Baroness recognized him immediately. Her friendly face expressed goodwill, and they had not seen this man for too long. The gentleman thanked her. She had just saved his life, but one shouldn't expect a warm welcome when you suddenly appear with an arrow in your hand. The Baroness escorted the gentleman to the dining room and warned him that young Mrs. Ellie was already awaiting his arrival. Weberk was surprised that this little girl was not just a servant, but a respectable resident of the Duke's house. Weberk, the blacksmith, her secret hope, had finally appeared on the doorstep, which meant one thing: the plan she had so painstakingly built in her thoughts was beginning to succeed. He brought with him not only his skill, but also the very detail that was the missing link in the chain of her design. Seeing the blacksmith, the Baron did not immediately believe that he had decided to visit the Duke's house, although they had not seen him for many years. Ellie said happily. She called him to meet him. This is her good friend who is very interested in weapons. Weberk liked the gift the Baron gave her, and the girl told him that the gentleman made weapons, so she thought they would easily find common ground. The meeting was too unexpected for both of them. The Baron still couldn't believe how it happened, and whether Ellie had really come up with something. The guest was escorted to a place of honor. The Baroness was incredibly happy to see this man again. The Baron realized that his wife had listened to the young lady Ellie and had come out to meet him. Could such a thing really happen? The girl pretended not to suspect what was being discussed, but it was not surprising that the Baron began to suspect her again. She decided to quickly change the subject, asking if the gentleman liked the mysterious arrow, and only thanks to her he looked at it to his heart's content. The blacksmith explained that this arrow was simply an amazing thing, and how the Baron even came up with the idea of using monsters as material for making arrows. The Baron began to animatedly tell how it all happened. They simply found a strange ore, and then found out what it really was. Everything was going exactly according to plan. Ellie was sitting with a satisfied face, and the boy wondered if she really liked this thing so much. Damien still hadn't touched the hot drink, and he preferred watching Ellie drink it. The conversation between the Baron and the blacksmith was moving in the right direction. He decided that a cutting sword would definitely be better than an arrow, and suggested that the master make one together. He was confident that with the skills of this man, a talented blacksmith, they would be able to create something incredible that had never been seen before in the Empire. But he completely forgot that the blacksmith's vision had not yet fully recovered, and this could possibly be a serious problem. The Baron knew that the blacksmith was refusing treatment, but suddenly he said that in fact he had been undergoing treatment for a long time. Just yesterday, he even received a special medicine from Dr. Deern, who personally comes and gives the medicine. Weberk noticed something due to his fascination with the arrow. He had completely forgotten to take his medicine, but for some reason now he saw more clearly than usual. Yesterday, he had completely forgotten to take the medicine prescribed by the doctor, and now, looking at his hands, he could not shake off the obsessive thought that this very medicine, which was supposed to help, had in fact deprived him of his sight. Weberk, accustomed to relying on brute force and directness, felt a cold suspicion arise within him. Feeling that he couldn't sort out this situation alone, the blacksmith made a decision. He turned to the Baron. Something was wrong here, and Weberk felt it with his whole being.